Matt and Greg used to interview movie stars, but now they're doing a podcast.
How's it going, everybody? It's Matt Levitz.
Greg Srizavasti.
And we are Matt and Greg.
Used to interview movie stars.
That's the name of the show. That's not who we are. But I do want to give props to my co-host, Greg. I just want to point out to everyone out there, Greg does everything I do, but he does it backwards and in high heels, which is very confusing and hard to follow. But man, somehow you pull it off.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So today's episode is Star Trek First Contact. We are going to be talking to James Cromwell, Alfre Woodard, Alice Krieger. She was the Borg Queen.
I always wondered is it Alice Krieger or Alice Krieger? I guess you have it right.
I looked it up.
Alice Krieger.
Yep.
Okay.
So we're starting off with the non-regulars, and then we go to the cast members. We have Michael Dorn, Levar Burton, Brent Spiner, Jonathan Frakes, and Patrick Stewart. Now, it might sound like this is a super long show, but that's only because it is.
How long is it? Please don't joke.
Too long. Way too long. So consequently, there is no junket talk, but there is something that I want to say. Listening to these interviews again after so many years has made me very aware of something. And I did kind of know it at the time, but it's even more evident now. And that is how much these interviews are a direct result of the people who sat at those tables. And I mean that on a couple of different levels. Okay, on a base level, and I learned this very early on as an interviewer, and you probably did too, Greg, the person that you're talking to will always reflect your mood back at you. So if you're silly and jokey with your questions, you're going to get silly and jokey answers. If you're overly deep and serious, then they're going to come across the same way. If you're confrontational, then they're going to reflect that back at you. They're going to be defensive. The interviewer really does set the tone. And all of us junketeers knew and understood that. So we all basically kept things light because that gave us better sound bites. Then their answers were going to be light. But on a deeper level, especially when you would do a lot of one-on-one interviews outside of junkets, you would really learn the way that you phrased a question would affect the answer. Your choice of words would influence things in subtle ways and affect the way that they responded to you. Putting a stress on one word over another could completely change the way that they chose to answer you. And we would learn how to use that. But what I'm really realizing now is how much the individual personalities of this junket group really did shape these interviews. Each person had a completely different interviewing style. These guys were not interchangeable, just asking generic things. When Cameron Turner opened his mouth, he would not ask a Shep Morgan question or an Alan Silverman question. He would ask a Cameron Turner question that nobody else would have thought of to ask or would have asked in exactly the same way. And that was everybody. I mean, you could type up any one of these interviews and show me the script, and I would be able to tell you, oh, Ron Brewington asked that question, Jordan Reif asked that one. And because of that, with everyone bringing their own perceptions and personalities to it, they would each get specific responses that no other interviewer in the world would have gotten. So you put all of us in a room together, and you would get this melting pot of different kinds of questions, which would result in a melting pot of different kinds of answers. So in that way, these tapes really are drastically different from any other interview that you might read in a magazine or see on TV, where it's just one person asking the questions. And I know we've said this before, but we really do owe a huge debt of gratitude to the interviewers on these tapes. Just to call a few of them out, our old friends and colleagues like Barry Krutchik, Kathy Kogan, Leo Quinones, Jeff Shore, Ann Laber, who, by the way, listens to the show, so she's my favorite. Even more than you, Greg.
Oh, thank you.
You don't listen to the show.
I'm sorry.
I don't even think you're listening now.
I'm sorry? Okay, yeah.
So anyway, shout out, huge respect to all those guys, but especially Ann Laber. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Ann. I listen.
Okay, good. Anyway, with that out of the way, it's time to take a journey into the past to November 10th, 1996. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And yes, I did just do that on purpose to be annoying.
Misnomer.
So a couple of things to know before we get started. First, as I think we said in the last episode, this is an even-numbered Star Trek movie, so you know it's one of the good ones. And second, we have ordered things, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, so that the first three interviews are the actors who were not regulars on the TV show, and then we'll switch over, and the rest of the interviews will be the Next Gen cast. This, of course, is not the way that we got them at the time, but we've reordered, as we do.
As we do.
So the first interview we've got is James Cromwell, who plays Ephram Cochrane. Greg, I've been talking a lot. Why don't you take over for a little bit?
You have been talking a lot, which is a good thing, actually. That was a really nice
Depends
thing.
on who you ask.
That was a really nice thing you had to say about our radio colleagues. It's just, you're right. I actually never thought of it that way, but it was a different flavor. And speaking of different flavors, though, this James Cromwell interview, I did listen to this interview, Matt, and sometimes even though I usually have nothing, I never say on the show like you do, like when you say I got nothing, which is funny because you actually have everything. But with this one, I got nothing on James Cromwell because I'm trying to decipher all the stuff that's going on. Whether it's I have extra what
He is an interesting guy.
Yeah, I need you for the Cromwell bit because I was perplexed and continue to be.
All right. Well,
oh gosh.
Yeah. Well, we'll start, I guess, with a little bit of professional history. Now, believe it or not, this movie was James Cromwell's fourth time appearing in the Star Trek universe, not the first. The first two were in heavy makeup, where he's completely unrecognizable. In the Next Generation's two-part episode Birthright, he played Jaglom Shrek, the series' first ever glimpse of a Euridian. On Deep Space Nine, on the episode Starship Down, he played a Karema named Hanok. And then in his third role, he finally played a human. He was the Prime Minister Narok in the Next Generation episode The Hunted. So he inhabited the Star Trek world quite a bit, but I think that Ephram Cochrane is really the one that... the character that people, I think, remember most, because it was certainly the biggest role. Now, as Greg was saying a minute ago, I think you guys need to brace yourselves because James Cromwell is quite the character, and he's probably not what you're expecting. If you only know him from films like Babe or L.A. Confidential, and I think that's all I'm going to say about that for now. I mean, he kind of speaks for himself. You'll get a sense of him, but he's quite a character. He is going to talk about The People vs. Larry Flynt, which had not opened yet. That movie came out in January 1997, 2 months after the Star Trek film. He also talks about L.A. Confidential, which is nice because, as you guys now know, we did not get him for that junket. So he wasn't on our last episode, but he talks about L.A. Confidential here. At the very beginning of this interview, you're going to learn something pretty fascinating, which was that the role of Ephram Cochrane was not originally offered to him, but to someone else who is a very prominent actor. I'm not going to tell you who. I think it's going to surprise you, and
spoiling is something I'd probably do, which I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, we'll let him impart the information, but it's... hardcore Star Trek fans probably already know this one, but for everyone else, I think your jaws are going to hit the floor. So get yourself ready. And, Star Trek fans, please don't say anything. Please don't ruin it for the others. I know you're all out there listening in a room together, so everyone just behave. Having said all of that, I think we're ready to jump in. So why don't we enjoy the wacky world of James Cromwell?
Here we go.
You gotta grab I took the wrong part.
There we go. Technology. It's not what it's cracked up to be, is it?
No, it's not the
First century.
2063 or whatever. That was the year we're talking.
Fourth, 25th century.
Well, Rick Berman said that they were excited about you for this part after you appeared on on Next Generation.
Uh-huh.
But then when the whole Babe thing happened, they thought, we won't be able to get him now. And they were pleasantly
Isn't that nice?
We can't get him on the phone now. Academy Award nominee, James Cromwell.
Well, I tell you, it was fun because when I went into the audition, I had just gotten it, and you feel like $1 million, and so. And they were very warm, and I didn't realize that they'd written the part for me, and that Tom Hanks was not available, so he didn't take it away from me, and it was great to get it. Because I actually found out that I got the job the night of the Academy Award, so I lost the Academy Award, but I did get a great job.
So you've lost parts to Tom Hanks in the past, is that?
No, that's a first. First, a lot to Donald Sutherland, but no, that was a first. No, actually, Sherry Lansing gave it. When she read the script, she said, it's a great script. And she said, Tom would really love to do this. And she gave it to him, and he did. He said, it's great, I'd love to do it. But he was directing a picture, so he couldn't.
Wait, which role?
Oh, you're
Wait,
serious about that? This part?
I'm not kidding you.
This project,
Yeah.
Tom Hanks read the role.
The role. He wanted the role Ephram Cochrane. They wanted, of course, they would have, believed me. I think Rick was really relieved because, of course, they would have had to rewritten the whole script. Tom Hanks was not about to play in the backstory of Star Trek. It would have been, Ephram's first contact or something. I don't know what the hell what would it have been.
So does it mean a lot to you to be a part of the Star Trek universe?
Actually, it does. It means a lot to me because it's sort of a little bit of a story. I had just finished doing a film with Oliver Stone, The People versus Larry Flynt, and someone invited me to hear Dr. Stephen Greer, who's the founder of CSETI, which is the Committee for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And I'd actually never thought about ETs and that phenomenon with quite the, he's a very dynamic speaker, and it's a very profound subject. And so I said to him afterwards, I said, I've just done 2 films with Oliver Stone. Maybe I can be of help to you. We can think of a project, or do a documentary. And I think the next week I was down auditioning for a part of a guy who made first contact. I thought, that's serendipitous. Since that time, I'm writing a book, which I've sold, which is about contact, a fiction novel. And I'm very much involved. In fact, I'm going to the desert on the 15th to try to have a CE5 with Stephen Greer, which is a close encounter of the 5th kind, human-induced encounter. And so I realized that Star Trek now, this venue now gives me an opportunity to sort of expound and articulate some of the ideas that I believe about the destiny of the human species and what's in the offing, what this all means, and what's at stake, and how serious it is, and how we have to address this now, and not give it up to the high priests, who are very eager to corner the market on whatever is opportunity and axe us out again. I basically believe, I don't mean this as an insult, that the Catholic Church has been the most repressive force to the advancement of the human species probably in the last 3,000 years, and it's I believe that the high priestdom of contemporary science will behave the same way. I have heard scientists on radio dismiss out of hand explanations of extraterrestrial activity, whether it's crop circles or abductions or whatever, without ever having availed themselves of the archives whatsoever or done any reading, simply based on their fear of the laugh curtain, their own prejudice, their own ignorance, their own hidebound ideas, and the fact that it jeopardizes their little bailiwick. And so that's.
But do you think an encounter like the arrival of the ship at the end of the film would be, even though Ephram had been prepared for it because he's been told this is going to happen, and people are just standing around gazing in wonder instead of running for their lives?
I don't know. My wife is scared to death to go out to the desert, which I find phenomenal. If you said, well, we're going to go out and have a close encounter, people say, yeah, come on, we're going to go out and sit all night. But she is actually frightened now. What she does is she projects in her mind that the actual event would occur, and they would say to her, come on. And she would say, yeah, but I gotta die, I gotta. The interesting thing about that event, of course, you got to realize 600 million dead. An profound war, a sense of hopelessness, a sense of despair, a sense of where do we go from here? What's left? How many mistakes can we make these mistakes? So what arrives to those people, it's not described in any detail, is the potential for an altering of a point of view and a way of life. And those people they're numb, they're open, they're profoundly moved. But it's no more terrifying than an atomic conflagration. They've been through it. So, and I believe in much the same way. I believe that the reason that as a species we're more accepting of the fact now. I mean, what they say, 85% of the people believe that there's life in the universe and that life is visited here, is because we no longer hold that as the big bugaboo. anymore. I believe that a lot of that was generated as a disinformation campaign in order to put people off from investigating very substantial and concrete evidence of contact made between either extraterrestrial entities or emanations of the overmind, Gaia, or whatever that they knew about. And so they kept putting out the blob and, much the same way as a lot of people believe that the counterculture was actually created by the CIA. You wanted to see what acid would work like if you actually disseminated it to a sufficient number of people, and they basically flogged it on the street. In the 60s, we all knew, man, I remember when we closed down Washington, the diggers used to go around. They were the Vietnam vets were the cops we had 100,000 people on that island, and you always knew that the really bad dope came immediately from the government. That's the way they did it. People fell out of, the guy who jumped out of the hotel room in Detroit. Well, they got a movie. They're doing a movie now in Montreal about the people who were used in institutions who basically the Canadian government agreed with the United States government, and they fed hallucinogens to marginally upset people and institutions against their will without any knowledge. I want to tell you, take 800 mics of acid without knowing what you're doing, you're going to have a really bad time.
What is a human-induced? Did you say the C5 is human-induced? What is the human-inducing?
He has a technique which involves coherent sequenced thought, which is basically a meditative technique of projecting your consciousness into the universe. Consciousness is energy. Those entities that are sophisticated enough to pick up the energy then recognize that they are backlocated by consciousness, and then they use 500,000 candle power lights and the sound emanations from crop circles, which I haven't heard yet, but they're sort of like a buzzing, in the hopes that the extraterrestrials will understand that there is a desire on the part of our species to make contact, and that they'll actually do that. So,
what if there's life out there and it's just as unadvanced and primitive in so many ways as we are? I mean, we assume, like you're saying, that they would pick up these mind emanations, which is a comforting thought. Mm-hmm. But what if they're out there and kind of warring and not super nasty, just basically as petty and troubled as we are?
Right. If they were advanced as we are, they'd still be stuck on their planet, because that's where we are, stuck. If they were any furthermore advanced, there are certain problems with traveling through space. If you come from Alpha Centauri, you've got to travel out of time and out of space in order to get here. Otherwise, you're going to have a 200-year voyage. So once you travel out of time and out of space, what does that mean? You're in 0 point, right? If you're in 0 point, you can go to the end of time and the beginning of time. If you go to the end of the time, basically, then you understand the solutions to all your problems. The solution to no problem is violence, I want to tell you. So they would have to be made of stone in order not to see that if you don't want to destroy, if you don't want to piss on the place you live in, don't choose that path. Now, this is what I believe. Now, some people say that there are ones out there who don't have our best interests at heart. I don't know that. If that were really true, would they not have manifested themselves to a larger degree and messed us up? And they ain't messing us up. They come so discreetly and calmly. I mean, there have been 1, 2, 5 cases of abduction where people have had needles put in, and maybe if those are true abductions, and those are actually grays or whatever they are, and not the CIA doing disinformation, then maybe they're a little insensitive to ourselves feelings as a species. However, if you can imagine what white folk did landing in Borneo, what the traipsing through into a community there and conducting their experiments, they have been sublime in their handling of this.
It's a cookbook. Now that Charles Keating is out, have you had any contact with him about your role, or
no?
Is that
No. No, I don't think Charles is going to be calling me.
What about that character and getting into that for Larry Flynt?
Well, the nice thing was that when I went to audition for Milos, I said, I met you before. He said, when? I said, I came in for Amadeus. He said, what part? I said, the Prince. He said, oh, Jeffrey Jones got that, because, Jeffrey looks exactly like the Prince. And you look exactly like Charles Keating. So I thought, wow, what do I have to do? Basically show up, which is really all I had to do. the part is basically really a supporting part. It's the catalyst for the events that lead to the journey of Larry Flynt as he comes to recognize his responsibility in protecting all of our rights by sacrificing basically his life in order to see that we have free speech. He seemed to be the only one willing to do this. The mass media was not willing to defend him until it came down to the very bitter end. He did it on his own. And Milos's point was that you abrogate some a degenerate's rights, you put all our rights in jeopardy, because those ones who do not believe in the Constitution will use any excuse to abrogate your rights. He, knowing this, because of course he lost his parents to the Nazis, and then he tried to begin his career under communism, and he saw the devastation when you let any of it go. You let the homosexuals go to the Nazis, the next ones are the Jews. After the Jews, it's the tall guys. And so, have you seen the film?
Not yet. I've seen it.
It's a work of art. It's just a stunner. When I saw the assemblage, I thought, this is nothing. There's no film there. But what Milos does is he has such an incredible sense of film and how to put pieces of film together, a montage, that he has created a work that that has a political point which will be available from young people to old people, from blue collar to white collar. He doesn't patronize anybody, he doesn't talk down, he doesn't give it up, he doesn't compromise it. He doesn't glorify Larry Flynt, he doesn't demonize Charles Keating. What he says is, he does what Brecht said called Verfremdungs effect, which was the distancing, which allows you instead of what we do in here, we tend to empathize and associate with the hero, and therefore we become subjective. We no longer can discern what is accurate in the event, so that we can base our choices on what's so. And in this film, he manages to keep enough distance, both from Larry and from Charles Keating, that you can see, if we allow them to dictate what we can read and what we can publish, we'll basically have no freedoms at all in this country. They'll take them all away. It will be to me, there's no better representation of where capitalism run amok than the Borg. That's what it looks like to me.
I'm curious about something in your, maybe it's your approach to acting. I don't even know if it's something that you can describe, but your final line that you say in Babe and the final line that you say here. Mm-hmm. It's amazing to this day how the two really ring in my ears. Something about them touched me a lot personally.
Gratitude.
What is it? Is when you're performing, when you're just going to say one word, thanks, or a couple words, that'll do.
Uh-huh.
How do you prepare for that, and what do you put into it as an actor?
That's a nice question. That's a wonderful question. It's happened on Babe that it was at the end of the picture where probably the first time in my life I really took responsibility for showing up as a human being in my craft, and not going into martyr and blaming other people for not working out. So I worked my little tushy off along with everybody else, and Chris said, why don't you play the last line right into camera? So I looked into camera, and when I looked down, I saw my father, because I'm coming more and more to look like my father, who was a wonderful actor and who never got an opportunity to see my best work. And so as I said the line into the camera, it was like my father saying to me, "You did good. This is good," which moved me profoundly. And then, of course, to be in the circumstances of reaching out my hand to the other and beginning what I believe is, the voyage was was another thrill. So it's the preparation of most of my adult life to trying to figure out why I'm here, what I'm doing, where I come from, and what my destiny and my responsibilities are.
Both of your parents came from show business, or your mother was an actor?
Well, I had a lot of parents. I had a father and two mothers, both Kay Johnson and Ruth Nelson, extraordinary actresses, and my father was a wonderful actor and director. My father-in-law, Lee J. Cobb. My mother-in-law, Helen Beverly, who was a star in the Yiddish theater. my grandmother on Ruth's side, who was a protein artist in vaudeville. So we go pretty far back.
So is it in your blood? I mean, is it in the genes? Was it preordained that you would be in this business?
Yeah, to some degree it was. I went to college the first time to be a mechanical engineer. My father came to a fraternity party where, the morning after a fraternity party when there was vomit and, stockings hanging, you know how disgusting it is. And he said, "Oh, I'm making a film in Sweden. You want to come?" So, and that was actually the first time I ever saw anybody work. And I thought, because my mother had quit the business after the divorce, and so I thought, geez, this is the life, man. Look at this. Wow. It was Ingmar Bergman's cameraman, Sven Nykvist, and all these wonderful people. I thought, Jesus. And so I just sort of fell into it. It's been a great ride.
You've got a movie coming up called L.A. Confidential. It says you play the villain here.
Yeah.
Kevin Spacey and Danny DeVito.
Yeah.
Tell us about
Kim
that
Basinger.
picture.
It takes place in the 50s in Los Angeles. At that time, during the Hat Squad, when Mickey Cohen was put away, basically what happened is that the theory is, of course, if you read City of Quartz, which is a wonderful book, highly recommended, the establishment basically arm-twisted the mob to stay out of California and took over the rackets for themselves, gambling, prostitution, heroin. I had a great line in it. I had incredible battles in that film. I had a wonderful line. Basically, we were responsible, the cops were responsible for disseminating heroin south of Jefferson because basically no one cared what happened south of Jefferson, which is basically true. When I was working with the Panthers, there were white communities that actually came to the Panthers to come into their community to try to get the drugs out of their community because they know bloody well who was bringing the drugs into the community. Anyway, that's not. So yeah, I played this bent cop, really badly bent, and I hope it works.
Well, that's a James Ellroy novel, and he wrote the screenplay.
Yeah.
But this is a film that was a book.
No, unfortunately, James Ellroy did not write the
he didn't.
screenplay.
I thought he did. Oh, it's just.
No, another guy wrote the screenplay.
But it's adapted from a book that you can go to. Is that a help or a hindrance?
I thought it was an incredible help. I mean, Ellroy is if you like that kind of writing, I mean, it's wonderful. It's slam, bang, thank you, ma'am. Lots of detail comes at you, lots clear as a bell. And I that really helped. In fact, it actually hindered me because I then got into an incredible upset with artistically because I had one view about what had occurred in the novel and other people had another view. So, like in this one, I don't know anything about Star Trek. You guys tell me. Is that the way? I don't know. And I don't want to know. I just want to show up and do my work.
What did you think of it as a movie?
What's that?
Star Trek as a movie.
This
and other movies you've done. Not
I thought it was a hoot. I think for even people who are not Trekkers, I think they're going to be pleasantly surprised. I think kids are going to go with their parents, and the parents are actually going to be entertained and enthralled. The same way Babe, kids dragged their parents and oh geez, another talking pig movie, and then they sat there and I would hear them in the middle of it start laughing and and catch themselves and sort of be embarrassed that they liked it, and that's just really fun.
Thank you.
Thanks
a lot.
You do have some of the best laugh lines in the movie.
I do.
What are you, astronauts on some sort of star?
That's right.
The best one.
Okay, so that was Tom Hanks. Oh, wait, no, that was James Cromwell. Sorry. I got stuck in an alternative timeline for a second. Multiverse shift, and I'm back. Okay, so for the record, when Cromwell said that Hanks turned the role down because he was directing another movie, that movie was That Thing You Do, with a theme song that Greg is now going to sing for you. Ladies and gentlemen, the dulcet tones of Mr. Greg Svirzavosty.
I kind of remember that song, but I don't know. It's that thing you do with the crew in the blue Danube.
Perfect. That was exactly right. I didn't actually think he was going to sing, folks. I'm so sorry for me. I feel responsible for
that.
My
friend Matt.
Oh, man. Sorry, folks. So, Greg.
Yes.
What is your take on the possibility that Tom Hanks might have been playing a major character in a Star Trek movie? How do you think that would have gone?
In my opinion, I would have been taken out of the movie, even though he's a great actor. I just felt that it's like, for me, shoehorning Brad Pitt into an episode of, I don't know, the I don't know, the practice or something. Or chips. Let's just say chips. Let's have him.
Sure.
Having
We're
him
practicing chips. We'll make up a new
practicing chips. Very good. That sounds pretty good. David E. Kelly coming in the right pretty soon.
I think Brad Pitt's available, so see if you can get him.
Boy. But what do you think, Matt?
Well, I agree. I don't like the idea. He is an excellent actor. I mean, obviously Tom Hanks is great in everything he's in, so that part's not an issue. He would have been great in this, but he would have stolen all of the focus. You know, I don't think they would have intended it as a gimmick, but it would have played that way, like some kind of crossover novelty. Like if Chandler and Ross from Friends visited the bar from Cheers and got into a trivia contest against Cliff and Norm, you know, that kind of thing can work on a sitcom.
Right.
But here you'd be pulling the audience's attention too hard away from the story, and I don't think anyone would have been able to stop focusing on, oh my God, look at that, it's Tom Hanks in Star Trek. And I think that would have caused two different things to happen. One of them is that it would bring in a lot of casual moviegoers who are not Star Trek fans, and the filmmakers would know that was going to happen, so they would have no choice but to adjust the script to adapt to that. So you'd have to have conversations in the movie, like a new guy walking around and going, wow, why is that guy's ears so pointy? So that one of the stars could say, well, son, he's a Vulcan. Let me tell you what that means.
Right.
And I think that Star Trek fans would get really frustrated at how dumbed down the movie would have to be. And then the other thing that I think would happen is it would make this movie stand apart too much. And what I mean by that is not counting the more recent reboot, which I think exists in its own universe, despite the presence of Leonard Nimoy in the first one. All of the Star Trek films and TV episodes coexist in their own shared universe. It's basically all one story broken up into different adventures. Some of the movies are better than others, obviously. I mean, just as some of the TV episodes are better than others. But you would never say, I didn't like that one episode, so it doesn't count. Let's pretend it didn't happen. You can't do that. It happened. It's part of the Star Trek story now. But if you bring in a megawatt Hollywood star like Tom Hanks, all of a sudden this becomes the Star Trek movie that had Tom Hanks in it. And now when you think of that universe as a whole, this one stands out and it throws off the equilibrium. Maybe the movie makes a lot of money at the box office, but in the long run, personally, I just see it doing more harm than good. Sorry, Tom.
Wow.
He's still a great actor, but please stay away from established franchises that don't otherwise do any stunt casting.
Wow. Okay. Very pointed. I'm sad. I'm sad again.
Okay. I got a couple more things about James Cromwell. So, again, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, Tom Hanks could not do it. And James Cromwell actually did turn out to be excellent casting, in no small part due to the fact that it turns out this man takes aliens very seriously. This is one of those junket interviews that 22 years later I still remember very vividly. I remember sitting at that table watching this Oscar nominee talk about getting ready to go out to the desert to try to meet an alien. And some of this other really out there metaphysical stuff and thinking, what is going on right now? It was kind of a surreal thing, but I mean, I guess that's just who he is.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, Greg, did you catch that moment towards the end where he almost called Star Trek fans Trekkies, but then he stopped himself mid-word?
Right. You know what? I did remember him saying Trekkies, but I don't remember the stop.
He almost did. He cut himself off, and it's a good thing he caught it because that's a pretty huge faux pas.
Yeah, Trekkers.
They are Trekkers, and don't you dare forget it. Last thing I've got for James Cromwell, he said he was writing a fiction novel about First Contact and that he had sold it, but I can find no evidence that it was ever published or that he has published any novels. There is a children's book author named James L. Cromwell, but that's a different person.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to say? I mean, I know he's an activist. He keeps getting himself arrested for different protests and, I don't know, sit-ins.
Yeah, I've got nothing to say. I'm still perplexed by that interview, but I'm glad that you covered it really well, and I apologize for just continue to be confused. What I wasn't confused by was our next interviewee.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad they don't all confuse you.
They don't all. Alfre Woodard. Alfre Woodard did not confuse me because she's obviously one of our most respected actresses in cinema and television.
She is quite well respected, yes. She plays Lily Sloan here. She's a big actress that probably a lot of people don't remember was in this movie, but she was.
I don't remember her in the movie, to be honest.
I do.
You do. I remember her in stuff like Down in the Delta, Miss Evers' Boys. She's, regarding the respect era, the respect thing, did you know that she's a 4-time Emmy winner? She
Okay.
won 4 Emmys.
I'm not surprised.
I guess there's a reason why I mentioned The Practice. She won an Emmy for her guest spot in The Practice.
All right.
She won another Emmy for that 1997 film Miss Evers Boys, co-starring Lawrence Fishburne.
Sure.
And the other 2 performances she did in L.A. Law and Hill Street Blues, 2 shows that was part of our Gen X culture. So.
Sure.
She's been around, obviously even before that she received an Oscar nomination, I think back in 84, 85 for a film called Cross Creek. So she has been, at this moment of time, at time and place of the interview, she was already, and that was 20 years ago, Matt, right? Some long time ago.
Let me look.
Yeah, Matt, you're looking.
I have that.
It's been a long time.
It was November 10th, 1996.
Oh, wow. Okay. Even by then, at the time of the interview, Matt, she was already an established and respected actress. So even...
But not at a Tom Hanks level.
Not at a Tom... Which is why she's
So
perfect.
she could inhabit this world and not upset its equilibrium.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say before we get into Alfred? Because I have a couple of PS things.
I do.
Yeah.
Now, Trek fans probably know that Alfred Woodard calls Jonathan Frakes her godson. Frakes, of course, being the actor on The Next Generation who plays Commander Riker. And it's mutual. I actually found a tweet from November 8th, 2017, where Frakes wrote, "Happy birthday to my amazing godmother, Alfred Woodard." So this is a long-running joke that's still going on to this day. And it's funny because they were both born in the same year, 1952. But there is a story behind it, and you are going to hear her tell it. So I won't spoil that, but just be aware that that is coming. And that's all I've got, unless you've got anything.
You've got a lot. And you know who has more?
Who?
Alfred Woodard.
I had no idea you were going to say that.
And here we go.
Flight of the Phoenix.
I wouldn't have been able to do the Phoenix, frankly. All that shaking. And I know I was supposed to go up in it, but I'm glad we were bombed the night before. Why are these drapes closed? I'm just curious.
The sunlight, it really warms the room up. We turn the air conditioning off.
Okay, I was just curious.
We're all vampires.
No, we keep the air
Everybody
conditioning
starts from my neck.
You didn't bring any garlic, did you?
No, because they keep the air conditioning off for the sound, and the sunlight really warms the room up fast.
Can you talk a little bit
Mark, sit down. Sit down. Can I talk about?
It seems like, in fact, I think Rick Berman said that they kind of had you in mind for a while about this.
Did they?
It's kind of what
They
said.
never
What-
told me that.
What was your, first of all, when you were maybe being offered this role, what was your initial thought process of what you thought might happen, and what,
Go to the principal.
what'd you think? When they first.
Well, my agent left a message saying, I'm sending over a script. It's for Star Trek. Look at Lily Sloan. And Jonathan is directing. Jonathan is a very old friend of mine, like 20 years worth and some real experiences with. But it was like, cool. I know Levar, and I know Brent and Gates and, new people. So it's like, great. And so when I picked it up, I wanted it to be really cool because I wanted to do it. And like within 5 pages, I'm there. After that first scene with Lily and Ephram, I went, I wanted to call and go, okay, I'll do it. And I was like, oh, be cool, finish the script. But it was just like, the same reactions I had watching it the other day in a screening room with my husband and 2 suits in the back. We were from the beginning going, hey, ooh, oh my God. And, when her head comes down there, and we were like, oh no, and I got it clamped on. I was having that reaction out loud in my office by myself when I read the script. So I couldn't wait to say yes.
It's something about you mentioned some wild experiences with Jonathan. He's your god? What? You're his god?
I'm his
What?
godmommy.
Okay, how'd that happen?
Well, in a drunken stupor. No. I think we met about 20 years ago, and we used to all pool our money to buy chicken to barbecue and beer, and there were about 3 or 4 houses of us, and we all we'd party and till we dropped and wake up there and go to that house. So it was just a great time of life, and I remember one day Jonathan asked me, I was saying something about my godmother, and I would probably talk about her a lot. And he asked me, what was a godmother? What's the job? And I said, well, a godparent is a person that is, responsible for a person's spiritual development. And they sort of see them through life. They look for them in certain things. And he said to me, I don't have a godmother. I never had a godmother. And then he said, will you be my godmommy? And I said, yes, Johnny, I will. And we sealed it with a kiss and a hug, and I've been Johnny's godmother ever since. But the funniest thing is, it is true, and we are close friends. And he'll just say to somebody, my godmommy, and then this big old guy comes up to me and said, that's your godson? I said, yes, it is. Doesn't matter at what age you get your godparent.
You've been guiding him spiritually ever since.
I'm not responsible for that spiritual life now.
Is it different for you as a distinguished actress? Because we all know you as a distinguished actress. Is it different for you? Is a Star Trek movie different from than another project?
No. The writer is queen and king. The script rules. I could be asked to be in guerrilla theater and I'd do it if the script ruled, if that's what attracted me to it. Everything I've done, I've chosen because of the script.
But was there any trepidation of entering that Star Trek legacy?
Well, I don't know it as a legacy.
You don't. I mean, everybody knows Star Trek, and there's the legions of fans and the legions of the series and the movies. I mean, there's quite an empire.
Well, I hear there is, but I don't know. I've never experienced it. I don't know what it is. I go to work. I mean, I suppose I could liken it if you say, oh, you're going to go to work with Vanessa Redgrave tomorrow, who is probably the actor I admire most in the world. Well, even then, the reason I admire her the most is I think she does the most concentrated, specific work and honest work of an actor that I know. Well, my craft is acting. My pursuit is to try to do specific, concentrated work. I'm going to run to go to work with her. I'm not going to have trepidation. I'm not going to think I'm going to work with an icon, because that's not, I think public looks on things that way. But when you got a job to do, you go to do the job. You go to have the job experience.
Well, that scene between you and Patrick Stewart in the briefing room, wherever it is.
That's his quarters. I don't know what that was.
But watching it, it struck me as, when you talk about the level of work and the script and all of that was such a powerful scene, and probably more than some of the really great Star Trek scenes up to that point, and it was almost like watching a little bit of theater in terms of how you all were working. Can you talk a little bit about that scene and experience working with Patrick Stewart in general? Well,
I think Patrick and I are both actors. We're both real actors, and we have a common language, and we have a common way of working and working out of. We're working out of the same point. We're both what you would call grounded actors. Some people would call it strong. I'd call it grounded. I mean that if you pushed us, we wouldn't tip over. And so knowing that scene was written with so much force, knowing that it is a big deal to tell the captain off, knowing all of those things, you're like pumped for the rumble in the jungle, right? So again, you can't wait to get to work that day. And Jonathan is a good actor and also is a great director and has great directing impulse. So he's got the language to tell us that, it's no extremes. We don't even have to make allowances. So you got 3 people in the top of their form ready to run the 440 in the Olympics. It's a clear day. There's no humidity. That's what you live for. And even sometimes you start, we had to shoot it from so many different angles because of the nature of that room and everything. But sometimes you take extra takes just because it felt good. It's like, okay, I think we got it. Let's do it again anyway. Because you understand the specialness of it, of doing it, the moment of being there together. And of course, it builds its intensity the more often you do it. It was just a great. It's one of those times that you get everything, all the elements together, and you feel very. It's a gift to have it happen to you.
You've had roles that range from judges and doctors. I guess in Primal Fear you were a judge, right? And a doctor back in the St. Elsewhere days. When you started, was that? Did you see that as a possibility, or have things truly opened up? I mean, one of the things I love about Lily is the fact that there's nothing made of the fact that she's a black woman with a white man, and in fact, it's just not an element in the story, and it's not necessary to have it as an element of the story. But 20 years ago, I think, even earlier in the Star Trek Enterprise, bad pun, it would have been something to become a story element. Do you see that as changing? Do you see that as opening up?
Do I see what is?
Well, just the fact that racial distinctions are not being drawn the way they used to be. The stereotyping may be changing.
Well, first of all, you asked me, did I see, when I started, did I see the possibility of playing a judge and whoever? I'm going to tell you something. I was raised by people that my parents and the other women that were around me, teachers, I didn't know until I was, 19 maybe, that I couldn't be the Princess of Wales if I didn't want to. It all depended on if I met Charles and I actually liked him, so I have never not thought that I couldn't do whatever I wanted to. And it's not that I was told, this is how things are, but so I wasn't working even on a negative energy. It's just, I've had the good fortune not to be around people that saw themselves with limitations, or even dignified the limitations that the world around them set up. So when I set out, I thought I'd be able to do, of course I thought I'd be playing, heart surgeons as well as girls who make clothes for bullfrogs like Popeye Jackson and Miss Firecracker.
But isn't the reality of Hollywood, I'm sure that then you have to throw out a lot of scripts.
I toss the bullshit. I toss it. And I don't take it personally. I don't get mad when it gets sent to me. I just go, oh, you had me confused with somebody else. Oh, you had me confused with somebody else. And I'll stay home. I have a fabulous life, and I yearn for time to have real life. So I don't have to keep working just to say I'm working.
But I mean, it must be nerve-wracking when for any actor it is, you work a job and then you're unemployed, and so maybe to toss those scripts sometimes is a little harder. They maybe stick to your fingers a little more than sometimes.
No, it's easy. It's so easy. It catches in your throat to try to say something that goes against your impulses. It's not even a decision. You can't even say it. You can't even do it.
Yet so many actors do, to pay the bills, or to redecorate the house, or.
Well, that's their own karma they're building. I'm telling you who I am. It's like, and it's not something like a decision I made because I think it's, this is a noble way to live my life. It's just that I physically and emotionally can't do it. It's too damn hard to work. It costs me a lot emotionally to take myself to a place to do some work, whether it's comedy, whether it's drama, whatever it is. It's myself I'm bringing there. And now it's my children, it's my babies who have to bring along with me. It's a whole thing. It's, and there's so much to make a movie, as you know. I couldn't possibly get dressed up to do something if it didn't sit well within me. They don't pay enough for that to happen. And, you know, I think, who knows, but I always trust that something's going to come along when I need it. Yes, I've set out for 18 months at a time. Yes, for 12 years, a part of my career, I worked 3 weeks a year, once a year. But I had a fabulous time when I wasn't at work. And when I was at work, I had a fabulous time. You know, I'll find a way to pay the rent, but it won't be by going against my impulses.
We see Patrick Stewart. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
If he's on screen as Jean-Luc Picard, and we know his Shakespearean background, and he just seems so kind of statuesque in his presentation. But he sits down here with us, and you know we can talk to him.
He's a goofball.
And did you experience his goofball side? Because you were certainly.
Well, yeah, I don't know him. I didn't know him as I'd seen, you know, Generations a couple of times, but I shook hands immediately with an accomplished actor, with an actor that I knew. It was a kindred spirit. And of course, immediately, yes, we started to goof, to laugh, to talk. You know, the dirty jokes start to roll, as well as, you know, discussing Shakespeare, as well as, you know, vehement tirades about the political scene around the world. I think a person that's really good as an actor has to be familiar one-on-one in person. Sometimes you may not get it from them because you're still considered the public, and they might hold back, but I think people that are really good have to have a sense of humanity about them.
Having done something in this genre, Star Trek specifically, not just science fiction, would you do an appearance at a convention? They have Star Trek conventions all around the world. The actors are often invited to come and speak to the fans. And it's,
but what do you say when you speak to them?
Well, usually people have either some kind of an agenda or they just go and answer questions. And, you know, the fans will ask all the range of questions, from this is reality and, you know, what was Lily thinking when she did this, to what inspired you as an actress to get, you know, your career developed in this direction or that direction. Would you do something like that, or do you think that that's not, some actors don't care to do these types of things?
I don't know. I guess I'd have to ask Johnny and them what it's like and what they think about it. And then somebody would have to invite me first.
I'm sure after the movie breaks.
Really?
You'll get invited, I'm
I think it's
sure.
a lot like this, except they all have pointed ears.
Well, you know, I'd probably gladly go if I could, you know, talk politics. I could get people to stand up and defeat propositions like 209, and to stand up and keep them from taking away sports for girls in schools, and keep them from taking, don't get me started. But anytime I've got a captive audience, I can always go and talk politics.
How old are your kids now?
I'm 5 and 2.5.
How has that affected your work being a mother? And has it affected the roles that you choose or the perspective that you take on it?
Well, you know what? No, it hasn't affected it. I really have always considered myself somebody's child. So, like I was saying before, there's certain stuff I can't do, which doesn't mean you won't see my backside before my career's over. Nobody's asked to see my backside. But if it's warranted for what is happening in a story that you need to see it, then you would probably see it. But, so that's not what I'm saying when I say there's certain things I want to do. So as somebody's child, I've never chosen things to do because of what I wanted people to think of me, or who I wanted to impress, or what I cared about what people thought about me, because I don't live my life that way. But I live my life so that I can sleep at night, so I can lay down, so I'll feel fine about myself. And I'm somebody's child, so I've always respected that. So I've always said I've never done anything that I wouldn't want my mother to see. I couldn't let my parents see, that I wouldn't look at myself. And so I didn't have to make the adjustment with my children, because I'm a somebody's child too. So, so there's no adjustment.
That's it, everyone. So when you see you running for political office?
With my butt out.
You just had a birthday, didn't you?
On Friday, yeah.
Many happy returns.
Thank you.
And there goes Alan Silverman at the very end, always bringing up somebody's birthday. I guess that would come up on his research, that every now and then a junket would fall on an interviewee's birthday, and Alan was always the guy who knew it, and he brought them a cupcake. That's just who Alan was. He's a sweet guy. Although he does refuse to listen to this show because he says it'll make him sad. But that's great news for us, because now we can say whatever we want about him. Greg, you go first.
Well, whenever I'm sad, whenever I want to be sad, I just hang out with you, Matt.
Oh, we're talking about Alan Silverman.
Oh, yeah, I know, but I just wanted to say something mean to you, which isn't true.
Okay.
But Alan Silverman is a really wonderful person.
He is. We miss you, Alan.
We miss you, Alan.
Alan is retired in Hawaii right now, living the good life.
And if you're looking, when you listen to the interviews and you're looking for really insightful, astute questions, they are actually given by Matt Levitz, not Alan.
I'm not sure that's true. So I have one postscript that I'd like to do. Mm-hmm. Okay. In this interview, Alfre Woodard said that if a role called for nudity and it was appropriate, then she would have no problem doing it. So I was curious, in the subsequent years, had she done any roles that called for it? It doesn't look like it. But my internet research did lead me to an Answers.com page where somebody asked the question, has Alfre Woodard ever been nude? Not nude in a movie, just nude in general. Has Alfre Woodard ever been nude? And the answer that this page provided was yes. And 4 people found that useful. So there you go. The internet, making the world a better place.
That is very interesting. I have a quotable that you probably, if it escaped you during the interview, I wanted to share it when someone was
Bring it right back up again.
Yes, I'm sorry. But I like, these are quotables, because if I say it, it'll just...
Then it goes into the American lexicon.
It will.
Because
it will.
You are Greg Srzewski.
Because that, yes. I do appreciate the quote, I live my life so I can sleep well at night. And I really enjoyed towards the end of the interview when she said, we're all everyone's children, because we are. And that's how she goes about her business, which is very cool. Very, very, very insightful. Very insightful stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that is Alfre Woodard. We are now going into Alice. Pronounce the name, Matt.
Kreega. Alice Kreega, who plays the Borg Queen. So if you are trying to place her accent, she is from South Africa. Greg, you want to tell us a little bit about her career?
I don't want to really say anything about Alice Kreega because I want to say something really personal about her.
All right, then.
She actually was really nice to me years ago, which I did not know. She starred in this movie called Sleepwalkers, story by Stephen King, of course. Movie didn't do so well. It got panned, but she was one of the leads in that film. That was one of my first junkets. Back in '92, my first full-fledged junket. Wow. And Alice Kreega was a very nice person.
You had it right the first time.
Oh, okay. So, and then also during this interview, she was, if I recall, she was also very, very forthcoming. So, but she was also in Sleepwalkers in 1992. But this is not 1992. We're talking about Star Trek: First Contact.
This is 1996.
This is 1996. So, yeah.
All right then. So the first voice that you're going to hear is mine. Take it away, 26-year-old me.
So we'll start with the makeup.
And work ourselves
how
down. How
excruciating was that?
And move into the mic so you can
Move into
get
mic.
too comfortable, unfortunately.
They went out of their way to make sure that I was as comfortable as was possible. They really did. In fact, I had 2 suits. The first one was a kind of heavy rubber, like thicker than a wetsuit, stiffer than a wetsuit. And we tried it on a couple of times, and it was tight, to say the least. It had done something that they hadn't expected. It had shrunk in the curing process a little bit. So it took 3 people to get me into it. We would kind of pull on a leg and pull on another leg, and then they would hold the suit under the armpits, and I would kind of wiggle down into it and put my arms in, and someone would catch a hand and pull it out the other end, and then they'd lift it up over me and zip me up, and I would kind of lock into place. And it was fine for the practice runs. And then the first day that we worked was a 20-hour day. And by the end of it, my knuckles and all the bones in my hands had kind of disappeared. And my fingers, my hands had swollen so, and it kind of cut off the circulation in fairly critical points. And we had a hard time getting it off because my hands and feet were so swollen. And we wrapped at about 1 o'clock on the Saturday morning. And Todd Masters and his team, who created the suit, went back into their workshop and worked in relays through that weekend, and they made me another suit, a soft foam suit. And the reason why they hadn't done that in the first place was because they were concerned that it would tear. And of course it did. So for the rest of the picture, I had a little team of people with glue in one hand and brushes in the other hand, kind of sealing me up as I split at the seams. But it was very, very useful. Both the makeup and the suit as a kind of tool for discovering who she was. I was enormously grateful to them.
How do you discover who she was? I mean, she really wasn't a human. She was a collective. So how did you discover her? I mean, what did you do to try to figure out who she was?
Do you know, for the first time, I guess in my working life, I didn't create a backstory for a character. I always kind of have a life. I made one decision about her, which was that I kind of came to the conclusion after talking to the regulars and talking to the people who'd been doing makeup on it for years and talking to the writers and to Rick Berman about what she was. I kind of decided that what she is pure intelligence, and that she just colonizes physical forms if she wants to manifest. She just inhabits people, takes from them what she needs. And that really the thing that drives her and moves her is the acquisition of power and the exercise of it and the enjoyment of it. And also what was interesting to me about her was the way that sexuality and power sometimes interface. And that was fun to explore. And again, I must say that the costume really did help. The suit, the first suit that was so hard to move in because it was so tight and kind of, it was like moving against resistance, kind of generated a gait that made me feel like an animal. I didn't feel like a human being. And when that suit went away and the soft one came, I already had that walk had kind of happened. And in the script, there was a line when you first encounter her that described her as being hauntingly beautiful. And that was what I hoped we would kind of accomplish physically. And I really think they did. I mean, I think what Scott did with the head was very disturbing and yet somehow attractive. And you kind of wanted to look at it again, and you felt a bit sick about doing that. I hoped that we would create a sense of discomfort and dissonance in everyone watching her. On the first day that we put it all together, you know, the suit, the head, we'd had sort of practice runs at all of it. And we were in a big makeup trailer with kind of wall-to-wall mirrors, and always the very last element to go in were the contact lenses. And we had all gathered, they were all there, the team that kind of put the Borg Queen together. And we were waiting for Rick Berman to come down and look at me. And they put in the lenses, and I kind of blinked, and I saw myself in the mirror, and I thought, this is very frightening. And in that moment, I saw everyone's faces reflected in the mirror, and they kind of all went And I thought, we've done it. They've scared themselves. They made it, and they're scared. So maybe we'll be okay. Maybe we've actually put together something that's very disturbing. And I felt in that instant a kind of wave of power. And then I was kind of suffused with gratitude for what they'd given me to work with.
You've played disturbing characters before, but
I don't know what that says about me. I'm still trying to figure that one out.
I like you.
Why do people
Why
think-
me? Yes.
Have you stopped to think about that? Why me? Because I mean, the skills that you bring.
I don't know. A director who I've worked with and who is a friend said to me, when I said we were talking, and I said I'm going to play the bad guy in Star Trek. He said, "What is it? You were kind of one of the most regular people I know, and you're playing weirder and weirder roles. What does it mean?" Well, I don't know.
Go ahead.
No, that's it.
When I talked with you for Sleepwalkers, you were talking about an interesting physical exercise. It was something like a yoga and a aerobics or something like that. Are you still doing that? And I understand it was involved you mentally as well. Did you use that? Do you use that at all in
Funny,
acting?
I haven't thought about that for a long time, but what I did at the time in Sleepwalkers was there's a form of yogic breathing that kind of generates and circulates energy. And I kind of used that as a tool for that character. But for the Borg Queen, I did something a bit different. I remembered when they offered me the role, and I started to prepare. I had a kind of a 3-week prep time because I'd been doing something in Toronto, and then I came back, and I had 3 weeks before I started. I remembered, I had a very vivid memory of my first day at the Royal Shakespeare Company, and the artistic director gathered us all together on the stage and gave us a talk. And he said to play the classics successfully, you really have to be as fit as an athlete in training. So I thought, well, boy, I'd better do something about this. So I did something I've never done before. I worked with a trainer every day for that 3-week period, lifting weights and running. Now, it's not something I've ever done before, but it kind of accomplished what I hoped it would, which was to raise my energy level kind of dramatically. You do get very pumped, I guess, working out. And I also did what I do when I'm working on stage, which is to do an extended series of voice exercises, breathing exercises and resonance and articulation. Just because the language is kind of different. You don't usually do that for film, but I felt that I needed to get back the vocal range that I develop when I'm working on stage. It kind of closes down when you're just working in film and television, because it's not how people regularly talk. But so I just kind of went back and stretched that out again.
Was Patrick Stewart at the Royal Shakespeare Company when you were there?
No. I think he was there before. Yes, he certainly wasn't there after me. Yeah.
But the reason I ask that is that there seems to be, well, in Joseph, for instance, Ben Kingsley was also in the Royal Shakespeare Company. Yet I don't understand how that prepares you to be a film actor. How doing the classics on stage, aren't they different muscles that you have to exercise?
Yeah, I mean, I always think that the kind of deep down process of inhabiting a character is essentially the same. You just articulate it in different ways depending on the medium that you use, as you say, different muscles. And it's great. I mean, it's great to do that, to go through all the mediums. And it's actually great every now and then on film to be allowed to be that big. You know, generally you're kind of doing kitchen sink drama. You know, it's real people in real situations, and it's generally kind of small or on a more human scale. It's just wonderful every now and then to kind of like turn up the volume, get to be big. and to inhabit something that big.
Take over the world, or
Yeah,
attempt to take over the world.
How was working with Brent and Patrick, both who are very acclaimed actors, at least within the Star Trek
Brent,
realm?
I spent most of the time, obviously, working with Brent, and he was quite wonderful. I am fascinated and full of admiration for the way in which, after 10 years, he is still making Data grow. I mean, the character is still alive after 10 years. I mean, that is very, very difficult to accomplish. That the character is still kind of charting new territory for itself is wonderful. And he was passionate in his pursuit of exploring the relationship and trying to add dimension to what was there on paper. It was great to be there with him. And Patrick is wonderful. He has that thing that wonderful actors have, which is a kind of white-hot focus that kind of gets hold of you and pulls you in, that you can't help yourself. You're just there because he is so present. Wonderful. And Jonathan, of course, is a love. I've never met anyone who enjoys the process as much as Jonathan does. He just kind of lit up that stage on a daily basis. There wasn't a soul whose name he didn't know, who he didn't say hi to and mean it. He is beloved. He really is much, much loved by the company, and deservedly so. He's great, and has a kind of sensitivity that I think only an actor has for another actor directing. If ever I kind of needed something, he was there, just in terms of suggesting a direction.
In fact, he's right there.
Something Rick Berman said about how well they know the characters already, having inhabited them for so long. What is it like to enter that world? I mean, you, after all, literally are the outsider as the Borg Queen, trying to take things over, but it's not something that you've lived with for 10 years the way they have.
It kind of makes it's a wonderful feeling because it's so real, it's so present, it's all there. No one's searching or struggling or looking. I mean, they're looking to push out their own boundaries, but it's a wonderful feeling of rootedness. They know who they are. It's great to be around, to walk into.
And you, Rick, said also that you so completely inhabited the character of the Borg Queen when you came in for your audition. They were just like, don't look at anybody else.
Well, they didn't tell me that. They sent me away and they let me hang on a thread for 3 weeks and then they brought me back. So you have insider information here.
Well, you can slap him now because he said they knew the second you walked in the room and you said.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
So, I mean, that's kind of, I don't know if you felt that per se. But if you did or didn't, tell me.
No,
But
I had no idea. I mean, I came with what I thought the only way I could see to do it, to make it work for me, was what I went and did. But it was interesting because Jonathan and I had a very similar take on how we should play her, which was, as he would put it, not to be kind of waxing her mustache. So it wasn't kind of like the Victorian villain lurking in the shadows, that we should try to make her as dimensional as we possibly could. Every opportunity to make the audience think twice about who she was and what she was doing, we should kind of take.
Before they whisk you away, could you give us a little thumbnail sketch of Amanda?
Oh, Amanda breaks my heart because it's a very dear picture. It's a very heartfelt, dear picture. And I don't know if it's going to get released. It was made for under 10 million. They were determined to keep it under that. And I think they hoped that Disney would pick it up. And it was picked up finally by Columbia, who, I am told, this is hearsay, thinks that it's too expensive to give it a wide release, right? It's going to cost as much in P&A to release it as it cost to make it. So they plan to give it a limited release. Whenever. I don't know. I mean, it's been finished for about 7 months now.
Is that terribly frustrating to know that you've worked that you feel?
It's heartbreaking, actually, because it looks beautiful. It's set in the 50s. It's about a family who goes through a very traumatic experience in that the father is a cowboy and has 2 sons, and his eldest son is very adept at being a cowboy, at being a rancher, although he's still quite small. And the little boy is not at all suited to it and gets very damaged in the process. He actually has an accident because his father is pushing him too hard and starts to lose his sight. And so it's kind of a family stretched to breaking point. And it's how the little boy comes through it. And it's a very dear picture. And it looks beautiful. It was in Montana, and it was shot on an anamorphic lens. So you've got God's own country on the screen. I mean, it's breathtakingly lovely. And I do pray that it doesn't go straight to video, because it kind of deserves more.
Thank you all very much.
Who was the director?
Bobby Roth, who did some very interesting work at the beginning of his career. Did a couple of movies, a movie called Heartbreakers, and has since done a lot of television. And so for his sake, if for no one else's, I hope it gets a release.
From hearing how you feel about it, I hope we get to see it.
So do I.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so that was Alice Kreega. Right at the very end of this interview, she was talking about a movie called Amanda, directed by Bobby Roth, and starring Kieran Culkin and Dennis Haysbert, who is probably best known as President David Palmer on the TV series 24. I miss that guy. Why did they have to kill him? Oh, spoiler alert. Anyway, she was worried that it wasn't going to get a proper release, and sadly it looks like she was right. It was released in South Africa, but not in America. I went over to Amazon to look for it, and they don't carry Amanda on DVD. They do, however, carry Nickelodeon's The Amanda Show, which I'm sure is very similar. Now, the role of the Borg Queen is one that Alice Krieger returned to. She played her again 5 years later, in 2001, on the series finale of the TV show Star Trek Voyager, and also in the video game Star Trek Armada 2. And then she played her one last time in 2004 in a Star Trek Voyager-based short film for the Las Vegas Hilton attraction, Star Trek The Experience, Borg Invasion 4D. Now, this film was a new addition that was added to the attraction, which had already been up and running since 1998. In case you're curious, Star Trek The Experience closed at the Hilton in September 2008, and it was scheduled to reopen at the Neonopolis Mall in Las Vegas the following year, but it kept getting pushed back, and then the owners lost their license. So that attraction is most likely gone forever. However, if you want to watch Borg Invasion 4D, you can find it on YouTube.
Oh, very cool.
So that's what I have for her. Greg, what have you got?
Yeah, Alice Krieger, she's gone on to continues to do to work in cinema and television. Recently, she was seen in a show created by Britt Marling and Zal. I don't know how to pronounce the last name. Batman Mangley. They're
Batman Mangley.
Bat Mangley. But they're the co-creators of this film called The East. But they created this show called The OA, and Alice was one of the leads in that film. She was also seen in the 2017 family film A Christmas Prince. And also in 2014-2015, she starred in a short-lived series called Tyrant. So she's still hitting the boards as far as not just stage, as she mentioned during the interview, but also in cinema as well. So cheers to her. Yeah, awesome.
So I want to say before we get into the Next Generation cast that I do realize that all 5 of the interviews that we have are men. That is not our fault. Marina Sirtis wasn't there, so please, no angry emails. I also want to point out that our friend Cameron Turner, who sadly is no longer with us, he was a huge Star Trek fan. He really loved the shows and these movies, and he understood all the tiny details about the Star Trek universe, and you can really hear that enthusiasm and that knowledge in his questions. We were lucky to have him at our table for this one, and hearing these interviews and how much fun he's clearly having, it really kind of makes me smile.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking about that at the beginning of this show, about how each person's individual personality would shape the question and shape the answers that we got. And I really do think that Cameron Turner was our MVP on this one.
Yeah, he was.
So
He was.
props to Cameron.
Props to Cameron.
Now, Greg, if you don't mind, I'd like to take this bio.
Yeah.
Michael Dorn is, of course, iconic as the Klingon Worf. He played him on both The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine for a grand total of 275 episodes, which is a lot. He played him in 6 Star Trek movies and also on Webster, Family Guy, and a ton of Star Trek video games. Put it all together, and he has participated in more Star Trek than any other actor by a wide margin. He also directed 3 episodes of Deep Space Nine and 1 episode of Star Trek Enterprise. Outside of Trek, and of course Chips, which he did before that, he mostly works as a voice actor on animated TV series and video games, other than an occasional appearance on shows like Castle. So, anything you'd like to say about Michael Dorn?
That is it. Michael Dorn, I mean, he talks briefly during the interview about his encounters with fans, so you'll be able to listen to that. Listeners?
Maybe some of you are those fans he's talking about.
Maybe. Well, you'll know right now as we voyage, and I was going to say something Star Trek, but I'm not clever. But here is Michael Dorn.
Michael Dorn dossier here.
So did you bring any
Talk a little bit
Neutrogena?
about the fact that I think most of the people who saw it the other night seemed to come away positive, feeling positive about this movie.
Mhm.
Can you give me a little insight to your feelings about this latest installment?
I think it's a perfect movie. I really do. I mean, I think for not just for Star Trek, but just for movies in general. I didn't have a problem with anything, which is very rare, with anything in the movie. I mean, I thought it was exciting. I thought it moved very well. It didn't dwell on anything in particular, and it was not self-indulgent in a lot of areas. I mean, it was just perfect.
You, I'm sure I've gotten this question before, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You have the luxury and maybe the disappointment of having makeup obscuring your face. For
No
most of the time
disappointment.
that you-
No disappointment at all. The pain in the ass is just the wearing of it. I mean, I hate that, and also being on the lot. I mean, I worked on the lot before at MGM, and it was fun to kind of get out and walk around and sort of enjoy the scenery and stuff. But you can't do that in makeup. It's just people are always looking and gawking and things like that, and so that part is not fun. But being in makeup is no problem for me.
But on the other hand, when you walk out into public, you have less recognition, which can be good and can be bad. You want to be recognized on one hand, and yet you don't want to not be able to walk through the streets. What is that balance like for you?
No, it's all good. It's all good. Believe me. It's I am very private. I don't like the adulation as much. I mean, I love the adulation when people say, "Hey, you did a good job," at that type of thing. But the sort of mobbing and people coming up and sort of when you're trying to have a nice dinner or something like that. And I realized that after a while, the people that do recognize you are true fans, and they sort of come up, "Oh, I love your work. You really, thank you," and that's it. And you get that, and that's plenty for me.
Well, your character is certainly one of the most popular, and the fact that it's carried over into Deep Space Nine was a testament, I think, of that. And when Patrick was here a second ago, he talked about the kind of relationship, for lack of a better word, that he developed with Picard, and the sense of admiration and certain things that he drew into his personal life from the character. Do you have any feelings like that about Worf? Or?
Not really. I mean, I think that Worf is an honest character. I mean, I think that he's pretty much true to who he is and what he believes. He may not know all the answers, but that's part of the charm. And I think, if anything, that's probably what I've come away with, or that I've instilled in the character, one or the other. That it's not about knowing it all at one point, but life is a journey, and that's what he that's what they've written into it, and that's what I've put into the character.
Do you think that's some of what people respond to?
I don't think so. I think people respond to Worf being this kind of, a guy's guy. I mean, if he was, in the 20th century as a human being, he'd probably be like a fighter pilot and, walk around in a flight suit and all that stuff. And, but kind of a guy's guy. I think that's what most people respond to, men and women,
Macho Klingon.
Macho, well, it goes without saying.
Do you ever find yourself driving saying, there's a lot of traffic, it's a good day to die?
Never. Never happens. When it comes to stuff like that, I'm a chicken. I don't want to die. I'll just, so no, I don't. There are a lot of things about him that I don't take home with me, but I think that's good. I mean, it's sort of like, I don't think I could ever be a soldier, but there are a lot of soldiers out here who are very honorable, and that's what they did. That's their whole existence.
You say you're a chicken, but you've flown in performance aircraft with the Blue Angels and the Air Force. I mean, you've got to have some guts to sit down and.
Well, but it's one thing to do it hoping to survive, and it's another thing to do it hoping to die, or expecting to die, so.
What is that experience like? I don't think that
flying.
Yeah, and flying those high performance planes.
It's a fantasy come true. It's freedom. It's I mean, there's a little bit of macho sort of. This is what the guys did, flying around, and but for the most, it's freedom. It's like you're up above everything else. You can go pretty much anywhere and do anything you want to do, and it's and you are close, like sort of to the heavens, And no matter how people fly all the time, but when you're in like a cockpit that has a glass canopy and you're just looking up, you just you get this kind of a feeling that you're getting closer to the heavens. Like, well, I'm really up there, closer to space, closer to something unknown, and it's kind of exciting. Plus, I'm a speed freak. So.
You have several airplanes yourself?
No, just one.
Just one? What kind do you fly?
North American F-86.
Which is not the usual weekend flyer.
Not the usual weekend flyer thing, yeah. It only has a 600-mile range on it, but you've gotten someplace in an hour, so.
What's the top speed?
You can go Mach 1. You can break the sound barrier.
And have you?
No.
And civilians can own these things? I'm naive. I had no idea. You can just go out and buy a jet.
There actually is a magazine called Trade-A-Plane, and you look in there, and it has all the different models, and you go, oh, yeah, let me call a guy. Heard you have an F-86 for sale. Yes, I do. And that's it. It's a pain in the ass with the FAA to sort of get through all the paperwork and all the stuff that you got to go through to get the thing going. But once it is going, it's just a joy. It's a real joy.
We were talking about Worf before as a character, and is it reading too much into it, or is this something that entered into it? He is, in a way, he's a token. He is the Klingon in the crew, or a Klingon officer, and you almost might see it as Starfleet affirmative action. Mm-hmm. Is that reading too much into it, or did you see that?
Well, I think you're reading too much and incorrectly. I think the problem is that we try to put 20th century values into 24th century. It just doesn't work. And on the other hand, we are 20th century people, so our perception is that. But no, I don't think it was a token. I think that from his point of view, if you want to look into the Star Trek world, I think he was qualified. And that's all it takes. You just got to be qualified. You got to be willing to sacrifice and do whatever it takes, and he was. And hopefully that's what it's going to be like. But I think he doesn't really look at that. I don't think anybody else really looks at it like he's just affirmative action, or we had to have a Klingon in here.
Does it ever surprise you that so much goes into creating all of what's around Star Trek? I mean, we have learned so much through Next Generation, and then continuing with Deep Space Nine about the Klingons and this rich culture. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to sort of just make the leap and say, okay, that's real. But does it kind of knock you out that
people think it's real?
Well, not that people think it's real, but that so much energy and creativity goes into creating it, and people in the audience internalize it and learn all about it.
The thing that I found strange was not so much that there's a lot that goes into creating, or a person sitting down and writing about this, but all, like you said, all the stuff that's around it, that people spend their time creating, language books and all the stories of why this happened and this happened, and it's just phenomenal, all the things that they do. I mean, they have, they had a couple of things that are really clever, but they have, Klingon language camps, and they had this book on tape that was about, that wasn't really about anything. I mean, it was very funny. All it did was rehash old stories and try to put a Klingon psychology to it. I mean, the most glaring example is the guy that is doing the Bible in Klingon, writing the Bible in Klingon. And you kind of go, I would think that there was something else that you could do with your life, something meaningful, besides spending 3 or 5 or 10 years of your life translating the Bible into Klingon, which isn't really a language. It's just made up. Gene Roddenberry said, "Yeah, Klingon," and that's where it came from. So, I find that a bit odd.
Well, that leads us to the whole little maybe over the edge. The people who have taken this Star Trek thing a little too far. You got the Trekkies, and you've got sane Trekkies like Cameron over here, and you've got insane Trekkies.
He's looking at me funny now.
Any other woman.
Right, you would have.
Any other woman.
And I know, I'm sure you've attended some of the conventions and things like that.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the really wild experiences that you've had with some of these fans?
I really haven't. I guess I'm one of the lucky ones. I really haven't had an experience with the fans that has been, like out of control.
Oh, they're probably afraid of you. That's
Yeah, that probably is very true. That if they are fans where the lines blur, between fantasy and reality, then this is Worf. And if they say something wrong to him, he could like rip your head off, and so I think that is probably why. But on the other hand, like I said, I have not had a bad experience. I had one bad experience with a guy from Canada, and it was a misunderstanding, and he was using the opportunity to. And I think if there is a problem with fans, it's this problem where they use Star Trek to gain some type of notoriety among their peers, or even in their own mind. Like sometimes people talk to you not because they're interested in what you're saying, but so they could say, "I talked to Worf," or "I talked to," and they don't really hear what you're saying. They don't really hear what they're saying. They're just, and I think that could be a danger. This guy had a major, thing going. About a misunderstanding and something that happens all the time, but he had to make an issue out of it. Don't talk to Michael Dorn. Don't think he's a nice guy. He's a mean guy. And the Paramount is going to pay for that. I mean, just really. And you kind of go, whew, okay.
What about
write the Bible.
What about the techno speak in Star Trek, especially since you're a pilot yourself, so you know what the real thing is, and yet you have to sound convincing talking about these transducers and things like that. What sort of frame of mind do you get into it?
Well, you totally blank your mind is what it is. I mean, you just have to just say it, like almost close your eyes and say it. Brent is brilliant, and Geordi is brilliant at Geordi, and Levar is brilliant at that. That techno babble, because they have to do it all the time, where I don't, and it's amazing. I mean, I just blank my mind. I just empty my mind. Just say the words. Don't try to equate it with anything. Just say it and get it out, and then go on quickly.
I know this is a minor point, but how did you keep your suit from decompressing while you were out there?
It's fantasy. It's not real.
Okay, I didn't know if you were so strong.
Some duct tape or something there, and just wrap it around.
Well, you didn't see that? It's I used the
Borg arm.
You tied that thing.
Oh, the Borg arm.
Yeah.
And that cord, yeah.
Yeah, the hand was like floating off.
Yeah, the thing is that in real life, you're not even decompressed. That wouldn't kill you. It's the 500,000 degrees below zero environment that would kill you. It would freeze your leg off like that.
So when an episode of Chips comes on,
I run. No, actually, I don't. It was such fluff but it was the late 70s. You know, it was mid to late 70s. That's what it was about. You know, the hi, you know, and oh God, it was just, I cringe. I really cringe. But the worst part about all that stuff is seeing yourself 20 years and, you know, go. I mean, I put together a tape not too long ago of stuff from only like 6 years ago, and you see yourself age right on camera. I mean, just right in front of your eyes, there it is, you know. And seeing myself 20 years ago was a frightening thing. It was a very frightening thing. But it was fun. I mean, the whole experience was the very good and the very bad in the business.
You were talking earlier about the anonymity that you enjoy because you're behind the makeup on the show. Does that, it probably means that you have less of a problem with typecasting when you go up for other parts. Are there other things that maybe you're working on that you can...
Actually, I've been writing and trying to get about 7 projects together at the same time to bring to Paramount, because I like Paramount, I like being there, and I kind of want to stay in the family. So I have these projects that I want to pursue when Deep Space Nine is over. And I love television, I love science fiction, so if we can sort of continue in that vein, that's great. But
Oh, jeez.
oh God, Jamie!
I was just going to ask if there's anything coming up this season that you can
No, not this season.
But that Tribbles episode had to have been a lot of fun.
No, the Tribble episode, the original Tribble episode was not one of my favorite episodes. And so whenever somebody was asking me, "Wow, didn't you have a good time?" I went, "Well, yeah, I guess, you know." So.
It's true, they don't like Tribbles.
Like the Tribble.
That's our headline.
That's the headline, right?
All right, folks, we're back from Michael Dorn. Matt, you have something to say?
Yeah, you know, he talked about a lot of projects that he was working on and trying to get off the ground. It doesn't look like he had a lot of luck. He wrote, directed, and starred in a 2002 unsold sitcom TV pilot called Through the Fire. And he's listed as associate producer on a 2007 film called The Deep Below, which he starred in with his next-gen co-star Marina Sirtis. And that's it. But, you know, well, he'll always have Worf. And it will always be a good day to die.
Nice. That's that nice reference. Yeah.
So next we have Levar Burton. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start. I've got a quick story about the 1977 miniseries Roots, in which Levar Burton played Kunta Kinte. I was 7 years old in 1977, way too young for Roots. But we had a Betamax, which was really unusual in those days. My parents were always early adopters of new technology. And they taped Roots when it aired, and I remember those tapes sitting on our shelf for years and years. They had put the label into a typewriter to make it look nice, so I remember these beta tapes with typewritten labels, Roots Part 1 of 3, Roots Part 2 of 3. And I remember my mom showing me a scene from the very beginning of the movie, when LeVar Burton is running away from the slave traders, and it's this exciting chase scene. And my mom said to me, "I've watched this scene many times already, so I already know how it ends. They catch him. He doesn't escape." But the scene is done so well with the camera moves and the exciting music and the acting that I'm on the edge of my seat, heart pounding every time I watch it, hoping that maybe this time he'll get away. And that's good filmmaking. And I remember her saying that so clearly, and then watching that scene with her and completely agreeing with everything she'd said. And I think that was probably one of the key early defining moments in my love affair with movies. And I know that this has nothing to do with Star Trek, but my mom's been gone for a few years, and I wanted to put the story out there about her. And like I say, the star of that scene was a very young LeVar Burton, who later went on to play Lieutenant Commander Geordi LaForge on Star Trek The Next Generation. So, Greg, why don't you tell us some more about him?
I mean, wow, that's a great story. I've never heard that story. So I'm reacting viscerally to that. That was quite memorable, Matt, for sharing that.
Okay, thanks for the review.
Yeah, I give 4 out of 5 stars there.
Oh, great.
But you know what's interesting
Pure
about
magic, a must see.
Pure magic, a must see. Rough magic, a must see. That's so. Oh, okay. I remember that movie quote. Oh my goodness. Okay. Here's the thing. At this moment of the LeVar Burton interview, when you listen to this, you get to really figure out that not only was he an actor, and Matt, you're going to mention some of his other works as well, and we're going to mention a little bit about that. But this, for me, just listening to this, it showed an established actor who was really evolving and growing into becoming a director as well. And during the postscripts, we'll talk about how he's grown since then. But for me, this was a really cool interview because it felt like this was a man who had definitely, along with having something to say, this was also a person in a gradual transition to getting behind the camera and continuing to evolve that craft. So...
Sure. Anyone who acts and it plays a regular character in the Star Trek universe sort of becomes iconic for that part, and it's hard for them to transcend that. I think that Patrick Stewart has. Levar Burton actually has another franchise that he's also probably just as well known for, and that is the children's show Reading Rainbow, which started in 1983 and ran for 152 episodes, 16 seasons in total. So he's also got that under his belt. And, of course, Roots, which we mentioned earlier. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the TV show Star Trek The Next Generation or with the character of Geordi, you should probably know that he can only see through his visor, which looked kind of like a virtual reality helmet. So you never saw his eyes, which sucks for an actor. You act through your eyes. That's the windows to the soul. You want to use that tool. And he never got to. But in this film, his character got ocular implants, which allowed him to remove the visor so that we could actually see his face. And that was new. So, of course, that was the first thing that we asked him about. My guess is that was probably the first thing he was asked about at least 50 times that weekend. As entertainment journalists, we just love our low-hanging fruit. But pay close attention to his skill at making the answer sound fresh and spontaneous, despite the number of times he unquestionably had to repeat that exact same answer at that junket, over and over and over again. He sounds like he's saying it for the first time.
Yeah, it's a very good interview. He's very engaged. Here is LeVar Burton.
Long day.
Guy Vardaman, representing which media outlet are you?
Paramount Digital.
See, we didn't know he was a ringer, and everybody's been saying hello to him.
We're like, what?
We're feeling pretty left out. So.
Yeah?
Don't talk to me at all.
Okay.
So after like, what is it, 10 years, we finally get to see your eyes on the show.
Yeah.
Actually, a couple times I think we got to see your eyes when you take the visor off in the past.
But when I took the visor off in the past, Geordi's dead white eyes were there because the seeing was done through the visor. Now the seeing is done through the ocular implant.
As an actor,
put this under here because we're going to get the noise of your cup hitting the china there.
Thank you.
As an actor, does that change the way that you play the role to actually be able to look out? And
No, but it did change the way people related to me as the character. And I hadn't realized just how much of a barrier the visor was until we shot this movie. And I recognized how people were connecting to Geordi in a way that they never did before. Rick and I have had this conversation about visor, no visor, visor, no visor for years, and he always expressed to me the importance of the visor for establishing in the minds of the audience the technology of the 24th century, and I got that. That makes sense. I understand that. What became problematic, though, was that in the execution of the television series on a weekly basis, it was impossible to share with the audience what the Geordi was seeing. It was just too expensive. In 179 episodes, we did that twice. So it didn't really pay off as a storytelling device. It was there it said technology, but we never fully had an opportunity to experience how that technology affected the mission. I mean, we were peripherally aware that Geordi was always looking at things and interpreting the information that he got, and somehow it was put into the mix, but it was never at the forefront of the stories. So it became problematic. It became a barrier in the storytelling. It also became a barrier physically. I mean, it was very problematic in as much as the visor became physically painful for me to wear. It gave me headaches. We screwed it into my head to get it to stay on. And when we finished shooting Generations, I resolved then that we really needed to make a change because I wasn't willing to go through that anymore.
Well, if you screwed the visor into your head, that would explain the headaches.
Yeah.
How did they attach it?
Maybe you can explain. That's good. That's quite an image.
Why are you to stay on?
Those Borg machines.
Yes, you were part Borg actually, and they never knew it.
Imagine, if you will, the temple piece in the visor, and that on the inside of that temple piece there are two flanges that go inward, and on the outer surface of the visor there's a little hexagon-shaped screw, and I have a fitting. That's the female part, and the male part has a handle on it, and I would stick the male part in and turn it, twist it, torque it, so that those flanges would move towards my head, creating a seal. And we also put double-faced tape in the bridge, the nose bridge, and sealed it up that way, so that no light could get through here or here. If light got through, then you'd see my brown eyes underneath. That would be bad. So the seal had to be really, really tight. It had to be almost hermetic. You see what I'm saying?
Uncomfortable.
Can you comment a little bit on,
Let me just finish one more point about the visor. So it presented problems in the storytelling, it presented problems physically for the actor who wore it, and then spiritually, it's just a sin to cover an actor's eyes. Really. It's just, and like I said, when we started shooting First Contact, I really recognized just how differently folks were now able to relate to Geordie. So it didn't change the way I played the character, but it certainly did change the way other characters played with him.
When you initially got this script, you knew it was coming, and when you initially got it, what'd you think of it? How do you think it came out? Give us a little insight to, your initial feelings.
That's one of the puzzling things about making movies and television, because it's the translation between the written form to the visual medium. It goes through so many different permutations because it's a collaborative art form, filmmaking. It starts with that idea on the printed page, and then it's interpreted through so many different souls, so many different human beings, so many different points of view. So the end result is always something different. I thought we started with a pretty good script. And when I saw the movie on Friday in a room by myself, I was overwhelmed by how well all of those elements came together. I did not expect it. I mean, I had heard the buzz, but, for me, and you can say all you want, but I need to see it for myself. And when I saw it, I was like, wow, this movie really works. This movie really works.
When Michael,
it's very rare to say that. That's something to say.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Michael Dorn called it perfect.
Did he?
Mm-hmm. He said there wasn't a thing that he didn't like about it.
Wow, there are so few perfect movies. I think Shawshank Redemption was a perfect movie. I think Searching for Bobby Fischer was a perfect movie. Pretty damn near perfect. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty close. I think Lilies of the Field is an absolutely flawless motion picture. I don't know. I don't say that about many movies.
One of the things that Michael said, he's a pilot, and I asked him about how comfortable he can get since he knows the real jargon,
right?
And then having to spout the techno speak.
Yes.
And he said you're much more comfortable with it. How do you get comfortable with it? How do you convince yourself that this is real stuff you're talking about?
My methodology, I had two approaches for Technobabble. One was to try and make what is, in essence, a laundry list of multisyllabic words that have no relation or bearing to my daily life make sense to me, or at least the concepts that those words are expressing make sense to me. And number two, spit it out as fast as I possibly could. And I'm naturally a fast talker. Jonathan and I share that in common. And so my strategy was, if I'm speaking fast, then the audience will probably have a better shot at believing I know what I'm talking about.
Good strategy.
That's the thinking. That was the thinking.
What about being comfortable in the Star Trek world? You've directed episodes of a couple of the series, right?
All three.
All three series.
Yeah.
Is this? Do you see it a natural progression to direct it on the big screen as well?
For me, I do. I know Jonathan felt that way. I don't think Patrick feels that way. But I intended to direct a Star Trek feature. Yeah. For me, it's a natural progression. Yeah.
Is it because you know the world so well? Is that?
It's because that's a large part of my career now. I have a deal to produce and direct features and television at Paramount, and that's a large part of what I intended to spend my time doing for the next 15, 20 years. And as Star Trek looks like it's not going to go away either, it makes sense that the two would ultimately dovetail in that fashion.
Maybe we could talk quickly about some of the other stuff that's coming, as we've they've got a lot of things listed here that you're involved in. You mentioned the development thing. There's a project called Daddy's Little Girl, which is a sitcom pilot.
Daddy's Little Girl is a sitcom that I've created that it will be reminiscent of a show that I loved as a kid called The Courtship of Eddie's Father. And I will play a single man raising his 11-year-old daughter. And instead of a Japanese housekeeper living in the house, my father, played by Ben Vereen, will be that person who has the differing opinion of how she should be raised. Vanessa Lee Chester will play Daddy's Little Girl. She was in The Little Princess and Harriet the Spy, and is currently in Northern California with Steven Spielberg, doing the juvenile lead in The Lost World. And there are other projects that I'm developing, there at Eagle Nation Television as well as features. And in January, I have a novel hitting the stands, the bookstores. January 15th, Aftermath will be released, which is my first effort as a writer. It's a book that was 2 years in the making, and is science fiction literature is and has been hugely important to me in my life. I read a lot of science fiction as a kid, and in all of the novels that I read, and I read a lot of Asimov and Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke and Ben Bova. In none of those novels were there ever any heroes who looked like me. There were no black people in the future of those books. And so Star Trek was the very first vision of the future that I came in contact with, where I was represented, and I was like, wow, finally, And it wasn't just me. I mean, Whoopi and I have had this conversation, and she said the same thing. My friend Mae Carol Jemison, first African-American woman in space, she flew on the shuttle. She became a scientist first and then an astronaut because she saw Nichelle Nichols on the original Star Trek series and got that very subtle yet powerful message. You can do this, When the future comes, you will be there. And so I think that, you talk about the sustaining power of Star Trek and, why has it lasted for 30 years? I basically feel that it's because of, yes, the hopeful nature of this vision, but it's also because Star Trek has always been about diversity and inclusion. Star Trek says there is a place for you at this table, right? Infinite diversity in infinite combinations and respect for all life. Those are ideals that we all, deep down inside, want to embrace. We want to say, yeah, I can get with that. I want to live in a world like that. So Aftermath is an opportunity for me to, one, create a piece of science fiction literature where the heroes were people who looked like me and familiar to me. And in the tradition of Star Trek, it was also an opportunity to address, through science fiction literature, issues that are of social relevance in the world that we live in today. And Aftermath is a post-apocalyptic look at the near future. It's set about 20 to 25 years from now. And the apocalypse in this story is the race war that engulfs America. Race is, as I see it and feel it, the single most defining issue in this country, in this culture. It is the issue that defines us the most because it is the issue that we deal with the least well and the least effectively.
Has the book been optioned?
Optioned? We are talking at Paramount about turning Aftermath into a miniseries, which will be hugely satisfying for me, having been in Roots 20 years ago. And Roots sort of opening up our consciousness in many respects. It was also had huge impact on our ability to have the conversation in this country about race. But in terms of the television medium, it was also a major impact on introducing to us this long form of storytelling. And as a producer, I'm really excited about doing a miniseries that is a story of my own.
In treating the issues as you describe Star Trek as presenting this view of the future of infinite variety, infinite possibilities, it never tells us how to get there. It just says this is something to aspire to.
Right.
And is that an appeal to you? Because it leaves it up to us rather than try to tell us, okay, here are steps that might work.
Yeah, you're right. It does circumnavigate that all-important step. Okay, I see where I am now. I see where we could potentially go. How do I get there? I hope, at least at the end of Aftermath, I present some of the information that might be interesting for us to contemplate as potential possibilities.
It's very interesting. I just heard an interview with Carl Rowan. He's got a book out called The Coming Race War, where he's essentially addressing the same thing you're talking about. The fact that race is continuing to polarize us to the point where there's a very real possibility of a conflagration coming soon.
Good. More examples in the popular culture that support my premise, the better. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think he's right. And what happens in Aftermath is America's inability to deal with the issues of race finally consume and engulf her in a very negative way. And the heroes in the story, though, are actually picking up the pieces on the other side of that, in the aftermath of that. I mean, there are other factors that contribute to the downfall, the fall. You know, the economy collapses and the New Madrid fault erupts and levels the Midwest, or a large portion of the Midwest. But it is the race war as the first domino that falls. And
well, thank you for making the big one in the Midwest instead of here. That's a nice touch.
Well, the New Madrid is actually, I mean, you know, it's much bigger than the San Andreas, much bigger.
Nobody thinks of it.
See?
That's right.
Come to California.
Maybe my Star Trek trivia knowledge is way off, but I'm trying to think of music in the future, and I don't know if there's that much. I mean, music doesn't play a strong role in the movies. It does in today's movies, obviously. You know, the soundtrack with everything. This one, we're going to have a beautiful score, but I don't think there's a soundtrack. Can you comment on that? I mean, has music ever played a role in this Star Trek?
Oh, it has. It does oftentimes. You've probably, obviously forgotten, but Picard is listening to music. We all listen to music on the Enterprise. It's an integral part of daily life out there in space. And, you know, from time to time, we remind ourselves just how important that is. You know, Data plays the violin.
I noticed the selections, though. Nothing contemporary from...
Well, the problem is, how do you create music that's going to be popular, you know, 1,000 years from now? Would you want that job? Even as Jerry Goldsmith, as talented as he is, would you want that gig? Would you want to have to do that? So drawing on the classics is a good out.
It would have been funny for them to throw a Nirvana song in and say, you know, like, this actually
survives and move to the level of classics. Yeah, right. It would be.
Temple Pilot.
There you go.
Come back to what you were talking about in terms of race being the defining issue of America today, the focal point of that. What role do you see Hollywood playing in that, either in defining ourselves or defining our society, or maybe pointing the way toward changes?
Within the entertainment industry, there exists an opportunity to help and enlighten, or to hinder and destroy. And we have seen examples of both over the 30, 40 some odd years in the life of this entertainment medium, television and movies. We have seen images distorted as they have been portrayed, and we have seen those misconceptions addressed in a more correct and whole manner. The potential for good and evil exists in this industry.
Now, is that asking too much of art of any sort? We were talking about the music a moment ago and what music might survive.
No, art is always political. Art has always been political, will always be political. So long as there are 3 human beings breathing on the face of this planet, art, literature, music, movies, TV, they will always need to address themselves to the social structures and the interactions of the people who inhabit the planet. They are a reflection. Art is a reflection of the society in which it is created. Always has been, always will be.
Then Oops, you're waving us off.
Wow.
Because I was thinking of the line from Julius Caesar of how many times in accents yet unheard, nations yet unborn, will these acts. There's certain things that are common that transcend the current time. And yet, the way you're describing what art being political, it seems as though it could become dated. If you see what I'm saying, that dealing with something as taking the Star Trek world and trying to view it through 20th century eyes, we put our own baggage on it. In other words, I guess is. I don't know if that's a question or not.
I didn't feel it was. And so requires no response.
But a nice dialogue.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to use it.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Alan Silverman at the end there, quoting Julius Caesar. Alan is clearly much better educated than the rest of us. If I had to quote something, it would probably wind up being, Def Leppard lyrics. And I want, and I need, and I lust. Animal. It's a love song about the drummer from the Muppets.
Very funny.
So LeVar Burton said that he intended to direct a Star Trek feature. To date, he never has. But he does continue to direct television, helming episodes of shows like NCIS New Orleans and Scorpion. He also described a sitcom that he created to star in with Ben Vereen called Daddy's Little Girl. I can find no record of this show existing. It may or may not have gone to pilot, but it definitely did not go to series. By the way, Ben Vereen is a Broadway legend. I grew up watching him in the filmed version of Pippin, which HBO used to show all the time. He co-starred in Roots with Burton. He guest starred on The Next Generation as Geordie's father, and he also appeared on Reading Rainbow. So I'm guessing the two of them probably know each other.
I would say so. So there's from his filmography. There's a couple of feature films he directed as well. There's a 2003 film called Blizzard. It's a family film, and there's actually a film from 2008 called Reach, or maybe H.
We should start using letters and years.
In 2008 or 8, he directed a movie called Reach for Me, starring Seymour Cassel and Adrienne Barbeau and Alfre Woodard, by the way. Alfre Woodard, who is his co-star in Star Trek First Contact,
right,
which we've heard. And it's about two people who are dying. They fall in love with each other. That's an interesting premise.
So it's a comedy.
So it's considering the depression that you and I inflict on a regular basis on this podcast with our stories. This one, sometimes sweet, of course, usually from you. That's really good. This is, I don't know what I'm saying, but Reach for Me seems like a movie that I'm really interested in seeing. It's on Amazon streaming. It's really cool that after this interview, some 20 plus years later, he's still thriving as an actor. He was a regular, like you were saying, he was a regular on Perception, which ran for several seasons. And the 2008, that Reach for Me film actually received really good reviews. And even though it's over 10 years ago, that's a tearjerker that I think I definitely want to dive into.
Sure. He also talked about his first novel, Aftermath, which, by the way, is still in print and readily available, although the potential TV miniseries that he mentioned did not happen. It looks like he has only been published again once since then. In 2004, he co-authored the children's book, The Rhino Who Swallowed a Storm.
Oh.
So that was LeVar Burton. Now we move on to Android Lieutenant Commander Data, Brent Spiner.
Brent Spiner.
So why don't you tell us about Brent Spiner, Greg?
Here's the thing.
You have no idea who that is.
I know he's a good singer. He's released albums as a singer.
He's a Broadway actor. He's appeared in Sunday in the Park with George, The Three Musketeers, Big River, 1776, and Lifetimes 3.
Have you seen all of them?
I haven't seen any of them.
Oh, not even Sunday at the Park. Oh, you've seen that.
Well, I haven't seen them with him in it.
Oh, okay.
I've seen several. I mean, everyone knows 1776.
No, I don't.
Sit down, John.
I'm sorry?
For God's sake, John, sit down.
See, you're very steeped in the theatrical world, and I'm 1776. Is that a special production or number that I should know about?
No.
Okay. Well, what do you know about it?
It's the pre-Hamilton.
Oh, got it. Yeah, from the Brent the Spiner interview, it was really interesting because you'd never think an interview regarding this Android Data would get a little bit Marvin Gaye, let's get it on sexual. And there are some teaser moments, folks. When you listen to the interview, there's some Data romantic things that are explored regarding Data's relationship or kinship with the Borg. I don't want to really get deep into that, but so to speak. So that's the one thing that I got from the Brent interview. What did you get from the interview?
Well, he gave me $5 not to ask any questions. So I went out and I bought myself an ice cream.
Oh, very good.
It was delicious. So why don't we get into this interview now?
Yes.
Brent Spiner.
Here we go.
We're really feeling left out.
Did I miss something?
Impressive.
He looked at you and he went,
This can't be a
Hey,
serious
he still
room.
sat down.
well,
That's right.
See, that's a good sign.
So who might you be?
Today, who are you?
he's coming.
Gee?
Paramount Digital.
Yeah, well, Paramount Digital.
Yeah.
Can't leave them out.
No.
Will we be selling that? Is that what we're talking about? Oh, okay.
No. Not licensing.
So I'm just curious, when you were growing up, did people come up to you on the street and say, you look like a mad scientist, or you look really intelligent, you should play a scientist when you grow up? Because apparently casting directors have just
You think so?
taken to that in recent months.
Well, a little bit, once. I mean...
Well, I'm thinking...
Just scoot into the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
I should have said the word mad. I mean, between phenomenon and... and this, you have this... It's like... We need somebody who's intelligent, smart. Let's go to Brent Spiner.
I don't think it was a plan at all. I think it just kind of fell into my lap that way. I mean, I think anytime you get employed as an actor, it's just a matter of luck anyway.
Can you comment a little bit on, people have seen this movie and the buzz is pretty good on it.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
Give us some insight to maybe what you thought about this as well, maybe going into it, initially looking at the script and maybe, the filming experience, what you thought.
Well, I haven't seen the picture yet, so, but I do hear that buzz myself, and it's really nice to hear it. But I'm the kind of actor who, when I read a script, I always think it's garbage, no matter what. I mean, not just Star Trek, everything. I'm not very good at reading scripts. I'm really not. I never see the value in them. Every now and then I like something, and then it turns out to be Bonfire of the Vanities, But I'm really difficult on writers and producers in that way, because I don't think it's my responsibility to tell them what's good about it, or even to focus on what's good about it. It's sort of my job is to find out what doesn't work, and try to fix it. And sometimes writers can get so close to the material that they have no objectivity anymore. They're just in love with it because they created it. And I understand, because I've written things, and I feel that way about my stuff too. But actors read things differently than writers do. First of all, I'm only interested in my part. I don't even read the rest of the script. They always tell you in acting school and that you should read the whole script so that you know how your character fits into the piece and all of that. And I don't do it. I don't believe it. I don't want to be bogged down with what everybody else is doing. I could care less. It's first of all, it ruins the movie for me. And when I go see it, I know what's going to happen. Secondly, the character doesn't know all those other things, so why should I? He's not concerned with what's happening when he's off the screen. And so I just like to focus on what I do. And the writers and producers have so much more to deal with than that their focus is scattered amongst everything. I get to focus and zero in on every single moment that I have and what the value in those moments are. And I feel an obligation to go in and say, this doesn't work. Let's fix this. This isn't good enough. This isn't good enough. Let's make it better. Let's make it better. And we've gotten to a really nice process with Star Trek movies in that there really is an open door policy. Once the script comes out, the first draft is generally plot and theme and very little character. And they do that intentionally because they have so much to accomplish, and they do, at this point, want our input on how the character is going to enrich those moments. And so we have lots and lots and lots of meetings about where the character is and how to put the character in into those lines. And so this was a good experience. I loved the final draft of the script. I thought was really good. I felt really confident that it was going to be a good movie. I was very happy that Jonathan was directing, because he's the best director we had on the series, and he's just a very good director in general. I knew that was going to be a really comfortable process, and so I had high expectations for this one.
Gotten a couple of different takes on how you're comfortable with that technobabble, with these words that really don't mean anything, yet you make them sound so believable.
Well, it's a weird kind of dialogue to do. It really is. There's nothing else like it. And you have to learn it differently than you learn other dialogue. When I'm doing a movie right now, and the dialogue's so easy, you know, and people come up to me on the set and they say, "Gee, you never make a mistake. You seem to know these lines backwards and forwards." Well, they're simple. They're things that a human being would say, and but with technobabble, as we call it, it requires intense rote learning. It's not just memorization. You actually have to get it out of your mouth, and it's a mistake some of our guest stars have made when we were doing the series. They'd come in and they'd start, screwing up, and they'd think, "I don't get it. I knew this last night." They always say, and it's true, they did, and they still do in their heads, but the muscles in their mouths are not used to forming those words, so they stumble over them. And I used to have a rule for myself that if I couldn't say the entire speech out loud without making a mistake at least once, I couldn't go to sleep at night. And so I was usually ready in the morning to do it whenever we got there. There was one technobabble speech in this movie that was huge, and it was really pure technobabble. And when I saw it, I thought, I started learning it before we started shooting the movie, because I didn't know when it was scheduled to shoot, and I thought, if this comes up soon, I've got to be ready to say it, and I know I'm not going to have time to deal with this. But it's one of those that I don't think I'll ever forget. It's just burned into my brain now. When I say something like, "Are you using a polymer-based neuro relay to transmit organic nerve impulses to the central processor of my positronic net?" And then it goes on from there, actually.
And were they using it?
Yeah, she doesn't really answer. No, after all of that, she doesn't. She just says, "You talk too much," or something. "Do you always talk that much?" she says.
So it's good to know the data is fully functional. That was nice to find out.
Yeah, I myself always have been, but actually, in the very first hour episode of the series, I said that very thing. It's really an echo back to that first hour, which was 8 years, 7 months, 16 days, 22 seconds, whatever, ago.
Now that Data has an emotion chip and he's got better control over it than he did from the last film, does that give you, as an actor, more to play with?
Yeah. It's certainly something different to play with. I was glad that was the direction they took it. I think people had just about enough of me being out of control with my emotions. There were a lot of people who didn't care for that at all in the first movie. I felt it was the obvious and only place to go because he was a child with emotion. He had never experienced emotion. How was he supposed to know how to deal with it? And I think it needed to start there. In order for a maturing process to occur, you have to start someplace to go someplace. And so we figure in the 2 years that have gone by since the last picture, he's learned how to use his emotions as an effective tool as opposed to it using him.
Well, the character is always, from the beginning, has always been trying very hard to mature.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's presented with a unique challenge in this film because he actually he already has the emotional thing, and now he gets the physical sensation.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of the next step that occurred in this picture is basically the seduction of the flesh for him.
And maybe you can amplify that a little bit in terms of what that challenge is for him as a character.
Well, I think it's a temptation, as he says, but that temptation lasts all of 0.68 seconds. And that has to do with the fact that he is indeed programmed for loyalty. And it was a fleeting thought of how marvelous that would be, you know, and how wonderful it is. But it could not override his initial programming ultimately. And he tries to tell the Queen that. She just won't listen. He tries to tell her, he says, I am unlike any creature you've ever encountered before. And it's not arrogance. He's just trying to tell her, you know, don't bother. It's not going to work. And her tragic decision, I think, in that is to turn on his emotion chip. If she had left the emotion chip off, she probably would have done a lot better than she did, because that's what enabled him to access deception, really. I mean, he needed the emotion in order to manipulate her.
Can you talk about the makeup and the look of your skin and what they use to make it look human but decidedly not human?
Well, I mean, the original makeup is just, it's a base, they put on a base and then they pack gold powder all over my face. And that's been what we've done from the beginning. And it hasn't changed. It took an hour and 15 minutes originally. It took an hour and 15 minutes on this film. The addition this time was the pieces that were added by the Queen, which, well, and I don't mean to call Michael Westmore a queen, but it was actually a prosthetic. The skin was. It was not. When I read the script, I thought, okay, they'll just take the makeup off of that area. But indeed, it was a complete prosthetic piece. That was kind of like Hannibal Lecter at work, you know. But it, if you looked at it in person, really close up, I would ask people, you know, look at my face and tell me which part is me and which part is a prosthetic, and they couldn't tell because it looked like skin. And then he also had the prosthetic that was the metal that's underneath the skin that ultimately gets burned away in the film. And Michael's a genius. That took 4 hours. That and the arm was a 4-hour process. But the Westmores, you know, they just have incredible genes going on. I mean, those are really genius genes, because the whole family is incredibly talented and has always been. Mike Jr. is as much a genius as Michael. He does all the electronic, the lights that are flicking through the face are done by Michael Jr.
Gold dust you get to keep when you wipe it off every night. Do you get to keep it?
Actually, the only thing that'll take it off is a product called Cleanse, which is mostly kerosene. And I've probably swallowed a gallon or two of it since we started doing the show. And I'm not sure what the long-term effects are, but whatever they are, I've got a major lawsuit against Paramount one day.
We were joking about the fully functional thing, but are we as the audience, are we?
Were you?
Oh,
sorry.
Well, I wasn't. No. But are we as the audience meant to believe that Data and the Borg Queen?
But what do you think?
She looked like she was determined, and he looked like he was interested.
You know, what we kept asking for, just to clarify that, because yes, indeed, I think that's what happens. We kept thinking it might be nice. You know, the kiss happens, we go away to another part of the film. I think they went out onto the saucer at that point. I'm not sure where they are, but because I didn't read that part of the movie. But what we kept hoping was they would come back and we would both be on that bed, you know, smoking cigarettes, you know, on that table. And then you would know for sure. But I think the idea is that they have consummated, yeah.
To move away from that real fast. Why?
I thought Data was a virgin.
Oh, no. Actually, you know, to be quite disgusting, I think Data has 3 speeds, actually, you know, being machine. Ring. There's that. There's ring, and then there's ring. You know.
But it's used for massage purposes, though, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm okay. I want to just be very selfish and ask another question. That is, everybody sort of talked about the different, almost torches that different characters of different ethnicities and races have carried on Star Trek over the years. Does your religion play any part for you in playing this role? Do you ever think of yourself as the Jewish Star Trek member?
I think of Whoopi as the Jewish Star Trek member. She's the Goldberg, you know, on the show. Well, in a sense, you know, I mean, there's kind of a fine tradition of Jewish Star Trek actors. You know, we've got Shatner, Nimoy, me, Whoopi, but I don't think it really plays a part in it in any way. I mean, I certainly wasn't cast because I was Jewish. I think there were, it just fell to me because I happened to stick the landing that day. It could have been anybody else, but I happened to have a good day, the day of the audition. But I don't relate to Star Trek in that way. I do relate to it in terms of tolerance and a celebration of tolerance, actually. I mean, to me, that's the thing that Star Trek does better than anything's ever done. It doesn't become it's not an issue at all of any kind, and I think that's what makes it sort of a higher form in a sense. It's so clearly not about race or religion or anything else for that matter. There is no judgment on what people look like, what they believe in. It's acceptance of all beings, and not just white or black or red or yellow or anything like that. It's races that look like dogs and races that look like snakes and Vulcans and Romulans and Ferengi and on and on and on, and they're never judged on that level. We've gone way past that in Star Trek, and I think that's sort of the most valuable thing that Star Trek does, is celebrating that idea.
The hardcore Trekker is unlike any other fan, and not just the casual viewer. I'm talking about the people who can tell you what serial number is on a plane that was in one episode.
Right.
What's been your experience with these people?
My experience with fans has been really good, I for the most part. I think if it were not for the fans, this would not be a 30-year phenomenon at this point. They're the most devoted fans ever, and I think they are mostly responsible for the 30 years of Star Trek. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I sort of relate to Star Trek. It's like baseball. It's sort of the national pastime at this point. There's no end to it. It's going to go on forever. It's a part of America. And, I think the fans have gotten a bad rap, really, in general. I think there's a misconception about who they are. I think, obviously, anytime you have thousands of people together in a room, a handful of them are going to be peculiar. I mean, even in this room right now, I find you very strange. But I think all that perception is based on a skit that was done on Saturday Night Live 15 years ago, or whenever it was done. And that's satire, and it's not meant to say that these aren't peculiar people. If you go to a convention, there are 3,000 people at the convention, 50 of them are weird, and have got uniforms on and are peculiar in some way. The other 2,950 people are just folks, just families and kids and, parents and people who enjoy the show, and that's all it is.
For the director calls cut, you said you're working on a film where you're speaking English. Is that out to sea?
Yeah, exactly.
And what's your role in that?
I play a cruise director who Walter Lemon and Jack Mathal work for, and we detest one another, and so it's a lot of fun.
To play off those characters.
Oh, they're brilliant. Yeah.
Are you not doing the Alien movie? I know there've been a lot of rumors.
Yes, I was in the other room and somebody said you're the lead in the next Alien, in Alien 4, and I was surprised to hear that. I haven't even had an audition for it, much less
Well,
it's one of those.
congratulations.
Thank you. It's one of those things that tells you don't believe what you read on the internet.
Exactly. Like we need another example.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, I think Guy put that on the internet.
No, I thought that you were George Jetson.
Oh, okay. Good. Thank you. So long, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you guys.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Brent Spiner, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, so that was our interview with Brent Spiner, and now we have Jonathan Frakes. Again, we're talking about a career, not in transition, but this is a career firmly established. Jonathan was made a name for himself by then. This was, what did you say? He was at the peak of his powers as a director, especially with the way this film turned out?
Well, yes, he's one of the more well-regarded Star Trek directors. Him and Leonard Nimoy, I think, are the two top
ones.
So towards the end of this interview, you were going to hear me ask him about a Star Trek CD-ROM. Now that it's 20 plus years later, I can only sort of guess what I was asking him about. But I do vaguely remember that there were PC games back in the day that were really rudimentary because the technology was really primitive compared to today. IMDb lists Frakes as the director of a game called Star Trek Klingon, which came out the same year as this movie. So that's probably what I was asking him about. Although I would not bet money on it. Who knows? Young Matt was weird.
You know, it's still interesting to listen to the interview because this interview, like you're saying, it's towards the tail end of the interview, and it's a nice callback to the power of the CD-ROM. You know, so I thought that was pretty cool.
Yes, those CD-ROMs were powerful.
They were very, but you put them in the thing and they do things.
Put them in the thing.
You put them in the thing.
Yes, Greg is a technical mastermind.
And they do things.
So I know I've said this on other episodes, but just a quick reminder, we do shuffle the order of these interviews around when we build these shows. You are not hearing them in the order that they happen. So you're going to hear some of us saying, like, you know, a few minutes ago, Patrick Stewart was here and he told us that you did this, or, you know, whatever. And here in this podcast, we haven't heard him yet. So ignore it. It'll be much more painless if you don't think about it.
Yeah.
So having said all that, here we're going to have a couple more things to say about him after the interview, right? No, probably not.
Maybe not. Maybe I'll have a couple things. But
keep in mind that not only did he play Commander William Riker, he was also the director of this movie.
Of course, big thing. Very big thing.
Here is Jonathan Frakes.
Here we go.
Let's talk about Star Trek.
Could you show a little more enthusiasm,
Yes, you need to
please?
really work on your enthusiasm. Because
Are
people are
you
gonna-
still a little high from your role as director on this latest movie?
What a year. What a year this has been. You see it?
Yeah.
What's the verdict?
Loved it.
Thumbs up.
Fantastic.
Siskel and Ebert.
Really good.
And then some.
Some have said it's the best Star Trek yet.
That's what I'm going for.
Is that weird to have? I mean, quote you. Yeah.
Yeah, really. Paramount's gonna walk
to
in
be compared. I mean, no matter what you do, you know that there's going to be hardcore people comparing you. Even critics are going to automatically compare it to the other films that came before. Is that
It's
frustrating?
inevitable. It's part of the deal. As long as I compare it favorably. Well, I like this one the best. That's the kind of response I like to hear. And it also turns out to be one of the even numbers of movies. Guy was one of the people who told me how important that was. Early on. You're lucky you got an even numbered one, man. I didn't know until then, historically, that's the deal.
Well, although also you have to say that Star Trek has jumped the barrier of even numbering the sequels. It's gotten that
It's got its own
big.
title, yeah. It's better that. Better that than seeing a number 8 behind. I mean, it's, Porky's.
But does it have a life?
Hey, I like the first few.
I mean, does it have a life that you can foresee? Or are we going to see, Star Trek, the nursery? I mean, not nursery. What am I thinking of? Nursing home. Years,
Haven't we really seen that already?
You feel pretty good about yourself, don't you?
What is it? I'm talking about Patrick.
No, I mean, seriously, is it something that you have to pump new life into, or is it?
I think actually this script holds up very well as a movie that just happens to be a Star Trek movie. I mean, the script is magnificent, and the story is well told, and the arcs are all there. The A, B, and C story intertwine beautifully at the end. You have a cast that has been together for a long time, so they're comfortable inside the skin of their characters. And then we were lucky enough to add to it arguably one of our finest actresses working today in Alfre Woodard, the delightful Jamie Cromwell, who is magic, and Alice Krieger, who I think is going to break out of this film and become a huge star. I think she's amazing in this film, dangerous and sexy, and so I'm very, very proud, needless to say, of the movie as a movie that just happens to be a Star Trek movie. And I think one of the other things that works about the script is that people who aren't familiar with Star Trek can sit down and in the first couple of minutes between that great pullback through the Borg hive and through the nightmare sequence, you know that the Borg are evil villains and that Picard has had some kind of experience with them in the past, and he's the good guy and his team, and the Borg are the bad guys, and let the war begin. And if you don't know why Geordi has those weird blue eyes, you take the leap of faith, so be it. If you don't know why there's an android with these people, so be it. Enjoy who it is. And I'm hoping that's what's going to happen, is that the non-Trekkers will be able to just dive in there, and because the characters are are well enough defined. You don't need to know that Ethan Phillips is playing the maitre d' and he also plays Neelix on Voyager. That's wonderful for the Trekkers. It could be Ethan Phillips, the actor, playing the maitre d', and it's no, all you miss is the double entendre that you get by seeing him. Same thing with Picardo. Because they hold up as actors, and the jokes are there anyway.
It also punishes people who aren't Star Trek fans because the other people get to laugh. And
Yeah.
then,
And then they'll tune in and watch the reruns, and then they'll go back and see the movie a second time and pay another $7.50.
And then your residuals will increase.
There you go. It's all about the plan.
I've been asked all day, and yesterday and probably the past couple weeks, is about the directing aspect. Can you comment on it? What was the biggest challenge? I mean, you know these people so well.
The biggest challenge was to deliver this, to be given for your Virgin outing a major studio holiday release action adventure movie is a thrill and a gift, but also somewhat daunting and overwhelming, exhilarating, exhausting. One of the treats was to get together again with the family that we all are, and to know that at least those 7 characters don't need my help to define who they are. Patrick comes to the table with Picard well in his body. And his body, something else we should talk about. He looks fabulous in this movie, but that's another story. And he's bald in this movie. The rest of our cast have been playing these parts for almost a decade. So we're comfortable with ourselves in them, and we're comfortable with our relationships. So I just had to worry about establishing Lily and Cochrane and the Borg Queen. So right off the bat, 7 of the 10 principals in the movie are, I just have to be careful that they stay in character. Like I had to remind Levar that that Geordi is boyish and charming, because Levar is no longer a boy. Levar is a man and a director and producer and very, he's an important member of the community now, and Geordi is still the youngest member of our company, so he's the one who has to carry the boyish charm off, because we're all getting old. So it's, it was little things like that, but in general, having all these actors know their characters made my life a lot easier.
Well, Patrick said that he had never seen you as relaxed as Riker.
He told me the same thing. I'm not sure if that's a result of being exhausted or confident or worrying about the next shot and therefore not being too concerned. I was frankly very happy with the way Riker came off in the film. He does seem relaxed and he seems to be enjoying his part of the story, as I did. I was thrilled to be in the scene with Marina and Cochrane, where the tequila scene, where the two of them are just getting cocked on tequila, I think is one of the best scenes in the film. And I'm very glad that the writers finally wrote to Marina's comedic strength, which we all know has been there, and she hasn't had a lot of opportunity to play with.
Alice Krieger paid a very nice compliment to you as well. She said that when you came on the set, you would acknowledge everyone, you knew everybody by name, from the top actors all the way down to the crew people, and that you created a real sense of togetherness there and made everybody feel a part of it and made everyone feel special.
That's very nice. I think that's what the director's job is, to establish a set in which people feel comfortable, and if they feel comfortable, they can be creative, and if they feel creative, I benefit, because something magical might happen and I might be able to capture it on film, and then all of a sudden I look like a genius. The other thing about working with this company for so long is that, I'm sure you've talked to the other actors, there's a real total lack of respect for each other that is infectious. Nothing and no one is sacred on our set, and you better show up ready to suffer the slings and arrows. And when we scheduled the days, Jerry Fleck was my first assistant, and he had worked with me a lot on the show as at first as well. We scheduled the days where all of us were gathered together with less page count to shoot, because we knew there would be singing on the bridge and dancing on the bridge and wrestling on the bridge and abuse thrown around before we were able to get any of the scenes shot. So as silly as that may sound, it also provides an atmosphere where people can then try stuff and not be afraid to fail. Feel like they can make suggestions that will not be thrown away without taking a look at them. And that's what you want at work. You want to have fun and you want to be able to be creative.
Singing and dancing?
Well, not me, obviously, but Brent.
Wrestling?
Worf. And Patrick.
Together?
Maybe.
Well, we asked him if he pumped up for the movie because the...
Patrick?
Yeah.
He's pretty buff in this film, isn't he? His guns look good.
Yes.
Do you hang the hat when you're in scenes where you know you're on camera? Can you hang the director's hat over here and say, because you were talking about thinking about the next shot or whatever, but you want to be able to deliver as an actor as well?
Most of the time, I think you can put the director's hat and leave it on the chair. I think you have to, or otherwise you can see it. If the camera's in close enough, you can see that you're not thinking about Riker, and that's problematic. In the scene in the ready room where I come in and Patrick's listening to the Berlioz, I hadn't been on stage for 4 or 5 days, and Patrick had been working his butt off, and so he was really warmed up and really into Picard, and Frakes was not quite there as Riker, and I found that out when we were rehearsing, so I decided to shoot Patrick's side of the scene first, and as we got his close-ups done, I ended up warming up as Riker, so that when we came around onto me, I was in somewhat better shape as the character. And those kind of things you discover just by, taking a look at the playback. I think, boy, he doesn't seem present, totally present. But on the other hand, the scene with Marina and Cochrane that I alluded to earlier, I was enjoying so much being in the scene with them that I forgot that I was directing, and that was good too.
Rick Berman said that you had to, quote, go to school. When you voiced your interest in becoming a director, you said, okay, well, you gotta go to school. So on the set, you spent your free time learning how to direct. Can you talk about those educational years, and that must have been, how difficult that must have been to take that free time to rejuvenate and be working?
Well, I went to school mostly in terms of the stuff that I was naive about. Like the editing, I was totally naive about. I spent about 300 hours in the editing room learning what that whole process, what the editors needed from a director to put a show together. And on Star Trek, obviously, there's a lot dependent on opticals and special effects and visual effects and sound effects. So all of that is post-production stuff, and the scoring and the mixing. So as I spent more and more time doing that and observing all the other directors that we got to work with on the set and watching them move the camera and thinking about how I would move the camera and thinking about staging the scene. I mean, I was comfortable with the acting and comfortable with staging scenes and things like that. And when it became clear to Rick that I wasn't going to go away anytime soon, he was generous enough to give me an episode, and I was fortunate to get the luck of the draw in an episode called The Offspring, which is arguably one of our finer efforts, only because the script is great science fiction writing. When you're doing episodic television, the writers can't hit 26 home runs a year, so sometimes some scripts are weaker than others, and I've been pretty lucky in the sticks that I've drawn. And Berman was very generous, I must go on record as saying, to give me this gift that he has to direct his film. And it was the script was so strong, it was really my job not to screw it up.
In addition to the film, you also have this new CD-ROM out. Can you talk about the challenge of putting that together?
I don't really have a new CD-ROM out. I had one a couple of years ago called CD-ROM Klingon. The Borg CD-ROM is directed by James Conway, but that's a whole different animal, directing for CD-ROM. Everything needs to be shot in a linear fashion, the point of view of the player, and there's no coverage, no traditional coverage the way there is when you're shooting TV or film where you can go in and get a close-up for a reaction. Everything has to take place as if the player is seeing it. And then, in addition to that, you have to encourage actors to look directly into the lens, which they spend years trying to avoid doing. So it's a different challenge.
There's also an element to that. I was interested that you got involved with CD-ROMs as well, because in a sense you're giving up part of the storytelling function, turning it over to the audience, saying, okay, you decide.
You decide, you make the choices. Yeah. It's tedious, actually, to shoot all those different endings or the different choices, But it's a very good education to know how to do it, because I think there's going to be a lot more work for directors in the future in CD-ROM. That doesn't seem to be going away.
Alfred Woodard is your godmother?
Alfred Woodard is my godmother.
She told us a cute story about your asking her what a godmother is and then saying, please be my godmother.
Yeah, and what a godmother to have. I am truly blessed. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Very much. Yeah, it's really
fine piece of work.
Yes, you hit the mark.
Well, there with that. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You know, some would argue that Star Trek First Contact is Frakes' best film as a director.
Who argued that? No, give me his name. I'm going to go find him.
But the good thing about this is I love careers that when we listen to these interviews and we can say 20 years later, they continue to thrive in their career. And you know, just from the credits, Star Trek Discovery directed 3 episodes. The Librarians, he directed 10 episodes of that show, the TV series The Librarians, and NCIS Los Angeles. These are all, even though predominantly in television, he's continued to craft and his career as a filmmaker. Maybe not huge studio projects post Star Trek First or post the Star Trek movies. He did
fan favorites, definitely.
Yeah.
And all of these shows that you're mentioning have big audiences.
Look, Leverage. Several years it was good. That little switcheroo show, that was good. Burn Notice, another good TV show that he directed episodes for. So these are all V, not so much. But you know, post
V was all right.
Oh, not the original V from the 80s. You mean
it was okay.
Okay, it was what it was. Yeah, you know, obviously after Star Trek First Contact, he went on to direct '98 Star Trek Insurrection. I don't know what you think about that, Matt. But then I remember us interviewing him. Maybe this was post you, Matt. I interviewed him for the films Clock Stoppers and Thunderbirds years later, and you know, by 2004, his directing career was still in full swing. Both those movies obviously didn't have the same effect as his Star Trek films, but the bottom line is he's continued to work at
but they probably weren't expected to.
No,
Star Trek has its own audience.
Of course not. Yeah. So, but
you already know when you make that, a certain number of people are just going to show up automatically.
Yeah.
So it sort of puts a safety net under you.
Well, kudos to Jonathan Frakes for continuing to have a really solid filmmaking career.
Absolutely.
And I think we're going to transition to a pretty big actor here coming up soon.
Patrick Stewart is our last interview. Captain Jean-Luc Picard himself. Just as a quick note, the first X-Men wasn't until the year 2000, so this was 3 years prior to him becoming Professor X. So at the time, this was his only big franchise. But clearly, if that happened 3 years later, he was kind of ready to take on another one.
Yeah, and going to this interview without spoiling too much, he talks about, you know, just having a little bit of time off and his dedication to the theater and all these things that you're talking about. I wonder with Professor X on that horizon several years later, if he ever did find that time to, you know, he's done theatrical productions and whatnot, but I wonder if his time has been booked for the last, it would seem 14 to 15 years of just stuff.
He does keep doing a lot of stage work, mostly in London, I think. But I do see his name attached to things a lot. He's a pretty busy guy.
Yeah.
So why don't we hear from? I mean, I don't think
I have a Patrick Stewart anecdote, but I think it's from the Star Trek that maybe we might do in the future with William Shatner. He had a really interesting
Generations.
Yes, it's from Star Trek Generations. I believe that was an out of town junket. You know what? I'm going to just kind of quickly share it here because it kind of dovetails into this interview.
Go ahead.
They asked him about his fame at the time, being famous, and he said he's glad that at this later point in his life he became famous, because if he had fame early on, he would not have handled it well. But what Patrick Stewart does handle well is this wonderful interview, which you're going to soon hear right now.
Greg Strzavosty, king of the transitions.
Yes. Okay, so here we go with Patrick Stewart.
Nice to see you. I should have checked because this was put in front of me, but are there is there any local radio here? No, none at all. No Southern California.
Why is it?
Oh, it's just that I want to try to grab half a minute to talk about something. Guy!
Hi. How are you? I'm local. Go ahead.
I need you. I need your help.
Okay.
I really do. I'm reviving my production of Christmas Carol here in Southern California, in Los Angeles, actually.
Well, please
in
talk
December,
about
so.
that, because regardless of whether it's here or not, it's
Yeah.
a story, especially with Christmas.
Well, you could say to me, so, Patrick, tell us, now that Star Trek First Contact has opened, what are your plans for the future? That's a really good question. I actually had plans for building a dry stone wall this autumn, and then I saw this script of Conspiracy Theory, in which Dick Donner is directing, and it's just terrific. So the dry stone wall remains unbuilt, and we've been filming in New York for the past 3 weeks and moving here in about a week's time to go through until the end of January. This is a movie with Mel Gibson, Julia Roberts. I'd also planned, once my wall was built, to come back to Los Angeles to revive Christmas Carol, which first saw the light of day here in Southern California because I began work on it as a means of exercising some of my atrophying stage muscles in the early seasons of Star Trek. And it was first performed in a friend's living room in Santa Monica. But since then, it's been to Broadway 3 times in London, and I'm very excited about bringing it back to Los Angeles. We've got the perfect theatre in the Doolittle. We're running it for just 3 weeks prior to the Christmas season, from the 3rd of December, with 2 weekend sets of previews, the one before Thanksgiving in San Diego, and after Thanksgiving in San Jose.
And it's very much in the tradition of what Dickens himself did, right? Let me put this in there just so that we...
Thank you. Yes. We have to thank Dickens for Dickens in performance, because sensible businessman that he was, he saw very quickly the financial advantages in presenting public performances, public readings they were in fact, although as the time went by, he was off book most of the time. And people paid a lot of money to go and see him. It's one of the things I wished I could now have experienced, because we have eyewitness accounts of what it was like. He was, of course, a very distinguished amateur actor, and there are accounts from professionals of the day that when they saw, he ran his own company, an amateur company of players, that they considered him to be an equal in acting talent. So, yes, I'm in his footsteps. He used to read Christmas Carol. He and I had very similar versions, but over the years, as he read it, he softened it. He took out a lot of the darker side of the play. I, on the other hand, have been somewhat emphasizing the darker side of the story, rather. And he used to read it as a curtain raiser to the chapter surrounding the murder of Nancy from Oliver Twist. We have eyewitness accounts that when he read Sykes's bludgeoning of Nancy, that they had to station nurses all the way around the walls of the theatre because people would pass out in horror at the reality of his reading and of his acting.
And you are you directing, acting, both? What?
I adapted the play from the novel. I directed it, staged it, and it's a fully performed evening in the theatre. It's not a reading. And I play 40-odd characters, depending on whether you include the goose as a character.
Now, given what you've told us about your background and what you do, when Star Trek has been around now for several decades, but it seems to me that what you particularly have brought to the franchise is this background in theater, is this approach to acting. And I was watching the movie last night, and your scene where, the Moby Dick scene, for lack of a better word, that's incredible. It's for me the most touching scene I've seen in Star Trek. What is your perspective on what you bring to the Star Trek franchise?
No different from what I try to bring to anything that I do. But in this case, there's one difference, and that's history. I have been doing this for almost 10 years now. I know this man quite well. In fact, it's true to say that I don't quite know where Patrick Stewart begins and Jean-Luc Picard leaves off. And so much of me went into the creating of the character, and there were even aspects of Jean-Luc Picard that, as I increasingly came to admire him, I decided I wanted to adopt myself. So there was actually a moment while I was watching the movie on Friday. That was the first time I had seen it, when I saw it with your colleagues. There was a moment when I looked at the screen and thought, but hang on a minute, that's me. There was something that was so personal that we'd put into the movie, and I'd forgotten just how it had got in there, but I heard my voice instead of Jean-Luc Picard's. So there's a quite complex commitment to this character and to the whole series. I believe in it, and I'm very proud of the work we did. It was 7 tough years of the series, 178 hours of television, and I'm committed to seeing this continue, because we have a very novel situation here for us actors and writers and producers. We can make a $50-60 million movie, and we can walk out after the screening, as I did on Friday night, and say, okay, right, that was very good. Now, here's what I want to do next. This is what I want to see this man doing. This is all terrific. However, we missed out this and this and this. And I was literally making mental notes to go into the first script meeting on the next movie. Now, you do that with television all the time. But to be doing it with a major motion picture is very novel. I'm sure that kind of thing happened perhaps with the Bond movies, when Connery was successfully the star for, I think, 6 movies. Maybe it happened with Indiana Jones, maybe it happened with the Star Wars movies. But we have a yet again different relationship with this material, and it's a fascinating prospect that while all of us go on doing the rest of the work and continuing our careers, we can return every 2 or I hope 3 years, and we can re-explore this world of Star Trek and these characters, take them further, expand them, attempt to do something absolutely new, bring a different kind of energy. I've been repeating, saying, yelling for the past 2.5 years, what we're doing is making the best movie that we can make, which just happens to be a Star Trek movie. I think that's our responsibility.
Do you miss doing the show on a weekly basis, or is this better for you?
No. I don't miss it. I was ready before the series ended to say goodbye to the series. I felt, I was beginning to feel by the 5th season that I had given the series as much as I felt I could give. I was tired and finding it increasingly hard to find something fresh for it. And I'd always thought that was a responsibility of ours, that we should find always fresh inspiration. I miss my colleagues. I miss my fellow actors, the other 6 of them, and the staff and the producers, and Guy, who I've known here for most of the run of the show. And we are a tight family. And although we stay close as the years go by, it's always it's a gladsome time when we all gather together again, for whatever reason. These are the best people in the world.
It looks like a good decision now, but when you first took the role, as Jean-Luc Picard, how did some of your British theatre colleagues perhaps react?
Oh, at the time, it all happened so quickly, I didn't have time to consult them. There happened to be one extremely distinguished English actor here in Los Angeles that week that I was offered it, and I did have dinner with him, and I've known him for a good many years, and he urged me to turn the offer down, claiming that it would wreck my career. I think he was wrong. And maybe he really wanted the role.
Weren't you supposed to be Data at first?
I've heard that. Nothing was ever said to me. I had somehow the impression at the very beginning, when I had 3 formal meetings with Gene and others until the role was offered, and the impression I had that I was to be the kind of token Brit on the show, like Chekhov had been the sort of token Eastern European. It was only as I prepared for the final reading that the penny dropped that they were considering me for the captain. And I must say, everything changed for me then. Not that I wasn't curious and interested in their interest in me, but when I understood that it was to be the lead character of the show, the captain of the ship, the man who would sit in that chair, I felt a little more intensely about getting the role.
Rick Berman said a while ago that a couple of things that he said were special about this movie. He said with your character, he was excited about bringing some of the action back, as opposed to the more brooding, introspective Picard of the last film. He also said that they were excited about making this movie kind of scary and bringing in those horror elements. Perhaps you could discuss that stuff.
Yeah, I think Rick and myself and Ron Moore and Brandon Braga all felt after Generations that Picard had been a little downbeat in that film. We developed this idea of the death of the nephew and the brother, and that was very important, and it was certainly in the theme of Generations. But it produced a certain kind of melancholic quality. Well, we decided that was all over, and we wanted to put Picard in the trenches, back in the front line, you know. Picard is captain's lead, and I said that we should see this man leading from the front. Then as the Borg idea developed, and it became eventually clear that they would be the kind of center force of evil in the story, that we had to bring Picard as close to them as possible. There was a draft of a script in which the role that Jonathan has on the planet was my role, and he was on the ship fighting the Borg. And you know, how stupid can you be? We kind of toyed with this for quite a time before everybody's saying, "Hang on, time out, guys. The place where Picard needs to be is on the ship, in the command chair. That's where the Borg are. That's where he has to be. He's wasting his time down here on the planet. Anybody can do what he's doing on the planet. Not that I mean Commander Riker is anybody. God forbid. But so that switch occurred, and with it, went out a whole kind of elaborate romantic storyline about a nurse and I don't know what, but we got him back on the ship, and we managed to hold on to this link with a woman very effectively too. And the character of Lily was created. Then she had to be got on the ship somehow, and so she was sick. We found, we went out to look actively for a much more active captain, much more physically engaged captain, as well as emotionally engaged. Dig into some strong feelings. And I think that's been quite effective. Now I look at it and I say, well, this is terrific, but maybe he should just lighten up a little.
Well, the girls liked you in the tank top. A couple of ladies I went to screen with.
They did?
You got positive feedback on the... Did you work out to prepare, or are you just naturally...
No. I had been working out for another project, a movie which I hope will be released early next year called Safe House, in which I had my first shower scene. And I was playing an ex-agent whose body was meant to be in great condition while his mind was falling apart. So that was already, the work had been done, and I was happy to continue it. And so we made use of the raw materials. And but it's more than that. I had always been in the vanguard of protest about our costumes from the very beginning, from the miserable spandex that we wore for the first 2 seasons. We are so buttoned up in these things. I think the costumes that they finally developed for Deep Space Nine were much more relaxed and comfortable and sexy looking, and we use those, in fact, in Generations. So I spent a lot of time talking to Rick and to Bob Blackman, the costume designer, about how we can literally open Picard up. So he designed this series of clothes, one meant to be on top of the other, which may be a little impractical if you think about it, but it meant that I could, as the story unfolded and became more intense and Picard was more engaged, and it meant that I could take these layers off, and with a deliberate intention of creating a somewhat more kind of heroic, manly action man figure.
A couple of other projects. Jonathan had his chance at directing this time. Do you have any interest in the future?
And how was he as a director?
I have a lot of interest in directing in the future, but it won't be a Star Trek project. I have no interest in directing one of these movies. I directed the series and was very happy to, but this is not the material that I'm interested in as a feature director. And what is more, I've now seen David Carson and Jonathan deal brilliantly with this subject matter And I've also seen what it has cost them too. And I'm massively impressed, especially with Jonathan, who was less experienced than David and was also playing a role in the movie. It was the happiest and most relaxed and creative time that I spent. And I think the best symbol of how good this time was is to watch Jonathan in the movie. Jonathan is more relaxed, more laid back, more light-hearted as Riker in this movie than I've ever seen him before. And that was an indication of just how good the times were when we were working. Jonathan is an authentic director.
I want to sneak in one more question because of your experience with the Royal Shakespeare Company and with Shakespeare in general. We're seeing so much Shakespeare on screen now.
Isn't that great?
But American actors seem much more reluctant to get into it, as though they have to mature into it, where British actors grow up with Shakespeare.
Well, that's true to an extent. We do. I had the blank verse in my mouth from the age of, earlier. My brother used to read me good bedtime stories from the complete works. But by the time I was 12, this language was becoming comfortable to me, and that is an advantage. It was not frightening, it was not intimidating. But as for American Shakespeare, I spent 6 months last year working with the New York Shakespeare Festival, doing a production of The Tempest. It was an entirely American cast. I'm sorry, I think there was one Canadian and one Cuban in the cast, and one Englishman. And I cannot think of circumstances where I would enjoy doing Shakespeare more than I did with that group of actors. And one of the things I did was to Americanize my performance, certainly in terms of how it sounded. I Americanized my accent because I didn't want to stand out. And what was interesting was that I think I enjoyed speaking that language, and some of it highly poetical from The Tempest, with an American sound to it than I ever have before.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And what are the dates again on
It opens the 3rd of December at the Doolittle Theatre and plays through until the 22nd. It's just 20 performances. See you later.
Great.
Thanks, Karen.
All right, so that was Patrick Stewart. I just have a couple of things I wanted to mention. A little bit about that stage version of A Christmas Carol that he spoke about right at the beginning of that interview. This was a one-man show in which he portrayed all 40-plus characters. He's performed it on Broadway, in London, and in Los Angeles multiple times over the years. And he actually does a lot of theater work. We talked about this a bit before the interview. He does a lot of Shakespeare, and not just when he was first starting out, but consistently even today. In 2009, he and Ian McKellen did Waiting for Godot. I mean, how cool would that have been to see Professor Xavier and Magneto doing Beckett?
Right. Yeah.
That would have been awesome. Too bad it wasn't filmed. Now, he talked about his desire to direct non-Star Trek movies. To date, he hasn't. But he did direct 5 episodes of The Next Generation, and I think that's it. Given that he's, in such demand as an actor, I think he keeps pretty busy. I don't think he really has time to direct.
Right.
Unless he truly wanted to. I suppose he could. He certainly has the clout, but I think he's happy doing what he's doing.
Yeah, and I've read subsequent interviews, just recent interviews about him now with... obviously he's busy sometimes when he's at this point. Maybe he's not really slowing down, but
no, not at all.
Not at all. But I read a recent profile piece on his love for Brooklyn and living in New York. It's a big part of his life now. Always been his love for New York, which you and I do miss because we never go there anymore.
I went there last year, but it had been a long time since I had. Yeah,
too long.
I do like New York because I'm a Broadway guy. Yeah. I'm a theater fan, so. Oh well. Don't get to go as much as I'd like.
Yes.
Anyways,
yeah.
Greg, why don't you tell them what our next episode's going to be?
I think our next episode is going to be an episode that is just a lot of people will listen to it because it's considered one of Steven Spielberg's best films. I will have a really sad and depressing anecdote, or maybe horrible.
Oh, good.
So, but not sad, just a very embarrassing anecdote.
You're going to remember your years storming the beach at Normandy.
Okay, don't make it that. Don't make it that. No. It's gonna be something else that I'm gonna. But you know what? No, in all fairness to you, Matt, there's gonna be a lot of that talk in the interviews for Saving Private Ryan, which is our next episode. I'm looking forward to this.
Great movie, great interviews. It's gonna be hopefully a great show. So before we go, we just want to tell you, please check out our webpage, which is www.dat?
Dat? I love dats. We should do an episode about how we miss dats. Junket Talk. That'll be at the Junket Talk ones.
Yeah,
dats.
That'll be really interesting for everyone, including us.
Oh boy.
Our webpage, which is www.mattandgregpodcast.com. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/mattandgreg. Want to ask you guys to please subscribe. That way you can hear our future episodes, because we've got a lot of good stuff around the corner and we want you guys to hear it.
Yeah, subscribe to all our platforms. I'm going to be greedy, say subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe, like our Facebook page, subscribe to our iTunes page too. Comment on our podcast via using iTunes. Comment, ask questions.
Talk to us on Facebook. We want to hear from you.
We want, and Matt, thanks to his years of, and he and Laura Gross, their years of interviews, we have an extensive, actually they, not me, I'm just a guy. They have an extensive, wonderful collection.
And I'm not just a guy.
Right. No, you're a great guy. So they have a great collection of interviews. If there's any movies that you're mainly from the 90s, late 80s, or, early aughts. I don't even know if aughts used. But you know what? If you have any movie requests, maybe we might fulfill some of those or not. But just bottom line is...
we might or we might not.
Or we might not. But the bottom line is...
subject to our will.
Yes, and our whims. Get a hold of us. Tell us what you think of the show. We would love to hear from you. We're not asking for money right now like most podcasts with their Patreons and all these little things. We are doing this for the love of the what? We're not doing it for the love.
I don't know. For love of money? Was that Michael J. Fox?
Or the lack thereof. That was a Michael J. Fox film, and that might be a future episode, even though I didn't do the junket. But until then, folks, Saving Private Ryan is right around the corner. Matt, do you have something amazing to say before we go?
Elbow.
Elbow it is, folks, and we elbow on along with the shoulders. Take care. See you at Saving Private Ryan.
We now return you to your regularly scheduled life.